But I did say to my boss earlier today, because like she said, oh well, obviously we're not going to be doing the Christmas thing this year, and I said, well, why don't we, when we've had the vaccination, have like an inoculation party or something?
That's a nice idea.
And I definitely said, you know what, this year I will definitely go, and I will get bladdered this time round, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because yeah, that would be very nice. That would be very nice. I mean, I don't, you know, I think I've coped better than most people because isolation doesn't bother me, like at all. It's just not my thing. It doesn't concern me. But I would like to see some friends now.
Yeah. No, I mean the thing for me, funnily enough, I've been thinking about it. I think I've missed going to the cinema.
Yeah.
And I'm not. I wouldn't have predicted that would be something I'd miss, but actually I do. I miss even though like I mean I'm quite happy going to the cinema on my own as it happens, but I still like the experience, you know. And I think I have missed that.
There's a communal element to it, isn't there?
Yeah, there is.
Especially if you like, I find because I go to the cinema on my own a lot, especially if it's a film that I really want to see and I don't want distraction or anything like that, you know.
Right.
I will go and see it on my own so I can absorb it, you know. But there is a communal element to it. I find that you feed off of the energy of other people. You know, there's like a vibe in the air, especially if it's a really engaging film. I found it with the Joker. You know, I really found that. Things like the Lord of the Rings films all had that. I mean, profoundly had that.
Yeah.
Even silly stuff like Dog Soldiers and you know that kind of thing. All it has that sort of almost like ritualistic, like a congregational element to it that, yeah, I do miss, even though I didn't go that often, you know?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that's so. I'm certainly like going to the cinema is definitely on my list. I think the other thing is getting down to the casino. I think I'm gonna play some live poker, which I haven't done in like 5 or 6 years, but that something because like I think at the moment if I had to pick an environment that I want to be in less than any other, it would be a casino, because I think that's got to be the most unhealthy place to be right now.
I can't
when you think
even.
about think about the surface of those chips, right, and how many hands they've come into contact with. I mean, it's not a healthy place to be at the best of times, if we're perfectly honest.
It's kind of a bit like going to a convention, isn't it? You know, it's people whose like inhibitions are lowered, who
exactly.
You're drinking, you're probably staying up quite late, so all of your immune system is shot anyway.
Absolutely. You're in artificial light all the time. You're even like, you're in a position where, especially if you're playing poker, you're sat down and you're stressing out, right? So your body's pumping through all of adrenaline that you can't do anything with. It's got to be one of the most unhealthy pastimes in the world. Add in like the non-trivial risk of infection, and it's like, I remember we got the notice after lockdown of it. I mean, the casino was literally the last thing to open when things started unlocking. And I was like, you are tripping, man.
Yeah, there's not a chance, is there? Yeah?
I love you guys, but there's no way. But once certainly once the vaccine's out, I'm going to get my ass down for a tournament.
I just want them to shoot me with it. I just want it to be like that scene in Father Ted where they shoot Father Jack down. You know, it's like just blast me with it.
See, I want to be like I want it like in the Iron Maiden in Tommy. I'm just like, strap me into that bad boy, pump it into every single vein.
Yeah,
just bring it on.
Just so there's no like chance of it not saturating every inch. Just give it to me.
Just change me at a cellular level, if that's fact. That's what I love, man. The fucking conspiracy theory is like, oh, it's going to change your DNA. You think I give a fuck?
I was going to say, fine.
Like, bring it on.
Absolutely fine. If I become like a scaly reptilian person, great.
Finally, the outside will match the inside.
Actually, I'd probably rather enjoy that, to be honest, given my proclivities. You know, I'd probably rather enjoy that. God, the furry community would love it.
There you go. But that's the other thing. That's the other thing that winter's reminded me of as well. It's like I am a lizard, because I can't be away from a heat source right now.
Right.
Like I because obviously I'm working from home. I'm sat at my desk, fully clothed, wearing my pajamas under my clothes, with a blanket and a hot water bottle.
Right.
I'm just like, you know what? I'm not a lizard at all. I should hibernate.
Yeah.
Like, I should just sleep from like late November through to about March, I reckon.
You see, I'm exactly the opposite in that regard. I
Oh,
can't. The summer kills me.
right,
It
yeah.
freaking kills me. And it always has. It always has. I can't function. I feel dim in it. I feel like I can't process and I can't think. And this year, because of course we had, we had a situation where we had to wear the full PPE, and we were doing very long shifts, and
Yeah, that must have been really hellish.
that was interesting. That was interesting. It was not pleasant. It was not pleasant. But winter I love. I mean, winter I come alive, and I love, those mornings when you go out and it's so cold it hurts, it bites. Wow, give me that.
See, my thing is like, I got this thing of like, I genuinely struggle to get out of bed. I'm just like, because I'm cozy, and I'm just like, I can feel the air against the small bits of exposed skin, and I just want to burrow. Literally, I just want to like.
I don't know. It just seems to be like there's something about your biochemistry, isn't it, that determines like. I mean, my mother's always said it's because I was a winter child, because I was born in like 1984 February, and there was like snowstorms like you wouldn't believe around that era. It was for weeks and weeks, and it brought down phone lines, and it was really bad. It was really terrible.
84, of course, yeah.
Apparently so. I don't remember, but so I don't know. My mum seems to think it has something to do with that. Whether that's the case, I don't know. But I need to function in cold temperatures. It's really strange. It's really bizarre. But I'll go to work and people will say, "Is it cold?" Well, I'm a terrible barometer. I don't know. It feels fine to me.
Yeah. So subarctic. I don't know. Yeah,
I don't know. It's fine.
Nice weather for penguins. So.
I've always wanted to go to I'll probably do it now as well. After this year I'll probably do it. I've always wanted to go to Reykjavik during those 3 months of winter that they have.
Oh yeah, sure.
Where it's just dark. It's dark forever, and the day, like what little bit of light they get is like for an hour or so, and that's it. And it's just perpetually cold forever. I've done extreme heat. I've been to places that are phenomenally hot. I mean, Marrakesh is just whoa. The Sahara, incredible. It redefines what you think of as heat.
Sure.
So a really cold place would be very interesting. Very interesting indeed. I mean, ideally, what I'd love to do is go to the Arctic or the Antarctic, but I don't know quite how you'd wrangle
how you even get there.
I don't know how you'd wrangle that one. And I think I'm reading Moby Dick at the moment. I'm rereading Moby Dick, and I think that's kind of inspired me as well.
Nice.
Because that friggin' book. Have you read Moby Dick?
I haven't. No. Wow. The only things I know about Moby Dick are the references to it in the movie Heathers.
Right. Okay.
So I know it's got the word Eskimo in it.
Yeah, quite a lot.
Literally.
It's something else. Moby Dick is. It really is. It's beautiful. I mean, it's massive. It's for the first. It's about 150 pages before the Pequod even takes off.
Right.
Before you even meet Ahab, it's funny. It's really damn funny. There's like these escapades that are like slapstick and funny and stupid and great. It's so odd to read. You don't expect these like prescribed enshrined texts that are like regarded as the very canon of all literature to be that funny. But it makes me chuckle every time I read it. It makes me chuckle.
I have seen. It's funny you mention it because I have seen on Twitter, and I don't think it's you, or at least not just you, been commenting on it. There's been a bit of a. I mean, it's Twitter. There's always a kerfuffle, right? There was some minor thing going around about, it's the old canon about, do you need to read the classics? Should you read the classics? Blah blah blah. And the usual kind of stuff got kicked about. But what was interesting this time was I saw more than one person saying like, don't come for Moby Dick though, because that's actually good.
It is actually good.
It's really interesting. Like there was this definite contingent of people saying like, we could talk about some of the other quote unquote classics if you want, but leave Moby Dick out of this conversation because it's actually good. Yeah.
It is actually good. I mean, Kelsey Freeze, it was Clive Barker that got me onto it because he cites it as his favourite book.
Oh, interesting.
It's like one of his biggest inspirations, so obviously I had to read it. And I read it a couple of times before, but not for a very long time. And it is surprisingly readable. A lot of classics are hard work, aren't they?
Yeah,
they're hard work. I love Dostoevsky, but he is hard work. Crime and Punishment is just incredible, but yeah, it's hard work. I mean, if you ever read like Victor Hugo, it's breeze block books. They're difficult to get through. They're dense. The language, obviously, because they're interpreted, the language is often very difficult. There's lots of ideas. They're very clever a lot of the time. There's very deep ruminations on the nature of humanity and morality and ethics and all sorts of things. But Moby Dick is really readable to a modern eye. There's a few things where it's difficult to work out what he's talking about because obviously the culture doesn't exist anymore.
Right. So is that like the equivalent of what would have been slang at the time?
Yeah, exactly. And of course, it's very niche slang as well because it's whaling. It's a whaling ship, and there's the very. I mean, it's very clear that Melville really liked to talk about this particular thing. And he's really into it. It's like that thing, that writers often do, where they've got a pet subject, and so it comes through in their work.
Absolutely.
It always does. You can't help it, can you? That's one of his. That's for damn sure.
Right.
For damn sure. It's a good book. I mean, I love it. I love it to bits. It's the affability of the characters. The way they interact. I mean, early on there's honest to God sequences with Ishmael and Queequeg just sharing a bed because you do.
Right. Yeah.
And they're very physical. They're very physical, like to keep warm. They hug, But it's also a gesture of like friendliness as well. It's not just like perfunctory, and that's made very plain. There's an ease of male contact. In the book, that's really sweet. I mean, really sweet. And the fact, of course, that Queequeg is obviously what is considered to be a savage at this time, but is treated with more respect in the narrative than a lot of the other characters.
Oh, that's interesting.
There is a great sort of egalitarianism in the book. Really is, because the people on the whaling boat don't care. As long as they can do the work, and they don't care. Nobody cares, The Pequod is this massive. It's equal opportunities, basically.
Right. Well, because it's survival. Ultimately, it's survival level, right? And survival requires everyone to pull their weight. So if you can pull your weight, you're an equal partner in what. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
You're in basically. It's a lethal environment as well. I mean, it's
of course,
dangerous on so many levels, and the fact that they're whaling in the ice-strewn seas is it's really dangerous. But it's a brilliant book. I mean, in contrast, I'm also reading Look Homeward Angel, and that's kind of the opposite. It's a really interesting book. But again, it's one of these great American novels, Look Homeward Angel. But it is massively racist, just unfathomably racist. It's something you've got to take the good from it. You've got to grapple with it and get over it. Basically.
I mean, that's interesting because obviously I'm still kind of very slowly working my way through the Holmes canon again for the show I'm doing with Jack. And one of the interesting things that we're kicking about in that quite a bit are the ways in which Doyle is and is not progressive. Like there are elements of his work that is I hate that phrase, for its time, but it's true. For its time, definitely quite progressive. But he's certainly got some of the kind of classical, I guess what I'd have to call like unstudied racism, unconsidered racism, that's kind of the product of imperial thinking. Yeah,
so just like the assumptions, just the natural assumptions of the culture. It's a very difficult thing, isn't it? And that's again something you've got to like. If you go to read the classics, you are going to run into that. It's like if you read Dickens. Now, you're not a fan of Dickens, I understand, but I quite like most of Dickens stuff. But you're going to have to tackle the anti-Semitism because it's there. My God, is it there? I mean, yeah, Fagin is an anti-Semitic stereotype. He just is, you know.
He's kind of more of a stereotype than Shylock is, and Shylock's like what 300 years before or something ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean the funny thing is, I mean, I remember discussing this in my like A-level English. We did The Merchant of Venice,
right? And I did it at school. Yeah.
The funny thing is with Shylock is, he is a stereotype, but at the same time he has these great speeches about egalitarianism, does he not? You know.
Yeah, he's an interesting one.
Hath a Jew not eyes, affections, emotions? If you prick us, do we not bleed? You know. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? It makes you wonder, is this Shakespeare like making a point? Because at the same time, Shylock is also the evil Jew, you know.
Yeah, his form and function in the play is what it is, and I mean it's very interesting to me that Merchant of Venice is considered to be a comedy, because to me it's very much not. I mean, for me it's kind of a horror story, really, certainly from Shylock's perspective, which is obviously what I instinctively gravitated to when I read it, as you might expect me to do. So wait, there's an underdog? Where? Okay, that's my guy. And so yeah, I think it's really, and it's, I mean, it's kind of unknowable, isn't it, whether or not it's Shakespeare, you know, actually trying to find a way to subvert an existing trope, or whether it's just Shakespeare doing what Shakespeare always does, which is finding the humanity everywhere.
Yeah.
You know, because that's, I mean, the reason Shakespeare's villains are as amazing as they are is precisely because he stints on neither the villainy nor the humanity.
That's true. That's absolutely true. I mean, the one I always go to is Iago. Who is like the villain of all villains. I mean, people tend to go to Moriarty, but I go to Iago. Iago is just repulsive. Like, he's evil. He's like incarnate. He's like the devil, isn't he? He is incarnate evil. Yeah. And yet, there is something fundamentally human about him. Like, he is this broken down guy who feels as though he isn't given what he's due. You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
He hasn't achieved what he thinks he's worth. He's a bit of a narcissist in that regard. And that lends him a humanity, whereas otherwise he would just literally be like Mephistopheles. He would just be evil for the sake of it, you know?
Yeah, no, he's a fantastic, because he's motivated by that jealousy. It's all consuming, and it leads into I don't know if there was I don't know, about a decade or more back, I think it was the BBC did a modern reworking of Othello. So it was a modern day script, and they had, and in this story Othello was the head of the Metropolitan Police.
Right.
And Eccleston played Iago.
You know, that does ring a bell. I don't think I saw it, but I remember reading about it.
Because he has the scene where he's congratulating Othello on becoming the head of chief of police, and then he turns and he's walking away, and as he starts walking, he starts stalking, and he's almost, you know, he's so angry, he's spitting at the camera as he talks, you know, with fury, and all of that resentment comes boiling out of him, and it's like, oh yes.
Well, you know, like the Shakespearean soliloquies are generally great, but amongst my favourites are Iago's.
Yeah.
Where he is just stalking around the stage and like reveling in his hate.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
He like finds it energizing, doesn't he? You know?
Oh, it's the ecstasy of hate. It's a real it's one, and it's great because it's both kind of wonderful and terrible to watch. Funnily enough, the other one I'm thinking of, and this is only in my mind because I've podcasted on this very recently, that the character Ian Richardson plays in House of Cards, Francis Urquhart.
Right.
Very similar vibe, although he's not as kind of on the surface unhinged.
Yeah.
But he is very, very unhinged indeed, actually. He just has this, you know, simulacrum of control, but he's actually a total monster.
Yeah.
You know, without any kind of real conscience or pity or any of the human emotions we might really recognize. It's pure will to power, you know.
There is something one of the things that, because I was quite young when I read Othello, and I think what attracted me to Iago initially is just this purity. There is like a purity to his evil, isn't there? You know, it is. He knows that it's hate and who it's directed at and why, and just goes for it. You know, he just revels in the role of the ruiner, of the one who's just going to bring it all down. And it's like there is something attractive in a villain like that, isn't there?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, definitely there is. Absolutely.
Because it's not something, I mean, generally speaking, it is not like true to reality. It is not something you find in reality per se.
No.
It's almost like a caricature of villainy, isn't it? It's someone who's adopted the role of a villain.
I mean, I think I'm not going to say such people don't exist. I think they are incredibly rare.
Yeah,
I think it is. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
And it is. I think it's almost like our fantasy of what evil must feel like, isn't it? It's almost like our kind of like people who are not that way inclined looking at those behaviors and going, but they must love it.
Yeah.
And maybe it's, it's really about our own demons. I think
it's
so. About our own kind of impulses.
That sort of enshrinement of villainy always is, isn't it? Because what we tend to do is we tend to enshrine evil and mystify it. We tend to make it mythic, like we do with serial killers. We do it with serial killers all the time. And the truth of the matter is, evil is banal.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
The truth of evil is that it's totally banal. It's common. It's everyday. It's commonplace.
And often, luckily, quite stupid as well.
Yes, very often, stupid and self-destructive. Very, very often. It exposes itself.
Yeah.
And when it comes to like what I suppose you might consider the grander forms of evil, when you consider people like serial killers and whatnot, it's often undirected and misunderstood. So they don't understand why they do it. It's not some grand thing. It's not like Hannibal. Hannibal's a really good example, actually, of like the mythologization of the serial killer into something grand and almost angelic. It's not that. They are just they're products of circumstance very often, and they are very often very confused, very broken human beings in many, 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 many respects. That doesn't in any way dilute what they do. It's awful, it's terrible, terrible things. But I do find it fascinating. I mean, I must have discussed it with you. I research serial killers. I read about serial killers. I find it interesting. Right. I find the extremity of it fascinating because it's alien.
Yeah.
The impulse to do what they do is alien to me.
Sure.
The sadism, the cruelty, the ones who are, I suppose, more merciful, who just get a thrill out of killing, the execution element of it. Again, I'm fascinated by how a human being becomes that.
Right.
What set of circumstances and what formative experiences go into that?
Yeah, I can see that, and you're right. I mean, I know we've talked about Hannibal before. Like, I simultaneously love the character and kind of don't. Yeah. Kind of ideologically, I don't like him for exactly that reason. He's a mythology. And the reality, as you say, is very banal. I mean, funnily enough, a work we've discussed before. Exquisite Corpse is another good example of that, where the real life characters that both those serial killers are based on are nowhere near as interesting as Billy Martin's version of them.
Not at all. No, they're very banal little people, aren't they? It's, Dennis Nilsson was like a profoundly boring man.
Yes, absolutely.
Like
very dull man indeed.
Profoundly boring in almost every respect. Yeah, they were. They were just very, very small, normal people. Apart from the incidents that they also did terrible things to other human beings. And I mean, I've seen like footage of interviews with Dahmer and whatnot, and he's as confused as everyone else. He doesn't have a clear answer, and in a weird way, I kind of respect his honesty. Like when he's asked, "Why did you do it?" He's like, "Well, I could say, but I'd be lying, or I would be simplifying, because I don't really understand." One of the things he said, which I found quite profound actually, is you can't comment on your own state of mind.
Yeah,
it's one thing you can't do. It's one thing you can never know, because it's the one thing that you have absolutely not even the delusion of objectivity about.
Right.
You can't. It's the very definition of what you are and who you are. You can't set it separate from yourself and look at the lines of influence and say, so that is why I did that, or that is what formulates the production of this impulse or that thought or that action, yeah?
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because there's a multi-billion pound and dollar industry called therapy, which is designed to do exactly that. Right?
Exactly, and it's problematic. It's problematic. It is. I mean, we know that. We know that because of studies within that field, which demonstrate that it's problematic. On any number of levels, but I always find that it's a very British statement actually, that I know my own mind. No, you don't.
Well, I always find the people who say that are normally the ones that don't have a clue what they're talking about, right. And I don't think that's any coincidence at all.
I mean,
and they're the same people who say I'm immune to advertising as well.
Yes, and they say things like, it never did me any harm. That's the one I come up with. That's the one and I'm like, no, stop.
Yeah, and they normally say that in defense of perpetuating misery upon the next generation. It's like, well, dude, I've got some terrible news for you.
A, you are in no position to make that statement because you don't know how much harm it caused you.
Yeah.
B, that doesn't in any way excuse doing terrible things,
Yeah. Well, I can tell you it did do you harm, if in no other way that it's made you happy with that harm being perpetuated on the next generation. So yes, it fucking did.
It did. Yes, it
broke
did.
You in a quite fundamental way, actually.
It normalised something awful, It normalised something terrible. It never did me any harm. No one is in any position to say what or what didn't cause them great harm. We are not in a place to do that. We need other people to often illuminate that for us, and even then it's very difficult. It's very difficult because of the nature of what we are. We're closed off in our own skulls.
Well, yeah, and I also think there's also the double bind of, like, even if you are kind of self-aware enough or you get enough help to kind of figure out, if you can sometimes make some even hypothetical cause and effect links, you can start to build a picture or at least a collage of how you built what you are. Knowing it alone isn't the same as being able to affect change.
No, it's not. It's not enough, is it? And very often what we formulate are very simple constructions, and very often it doesn't in any way diminish their worth if it helps you formulating this collage or this structure. But they are often either exaggerated or entirely synthetic. A lot of being who we are is actually learning to appreciate profound delusion. The delusion of who we are, the assumptions of self, the things that we narrativize and make a part of our canon of who we are is often not. It doesn't have much basis in actual reality,
Well, no, for two reasons. One, our ability to detect patterns when they aren't there. That's the first thing that immediately kind of gets us. And I think related very strongly to that, our inability to separate out the effect of chance on our lives versus whatever we will to have, whatever we will to do.
Exactly.
The degree to which our existences are dictated by randomness.
Yes.
My personal opinion is that is a reality that most of us, myself probably included, actually don't ever really engage with on an honest level.
I think part of the problem is it's too big and we are terrified of it.
Exactly.
We are terrified of it. Because the raw fact of the matter is that thought experiment eventually leads you back to the beginning of all reality. You have to consider the unspoken primordial influences that are happening, that inform the eventual formulation of you. So you go, it's not just genetic, it's not just cultural, it's historical, it's geographic, it goes back to chemical and physical eventually. It's evolutionary. And when you start considering those influences, you actually start to realize that we are all fundamentally out of control. Whatever delusion of choices that we have, it doesn't exist. Free will is the most profound delusion we ever inflicted on ourselves.
It's really impressive, isn't it? Because it doesn't hold up to any kind of scrutiny, and yet we cling to it as such we structure our entire society around this fairly obvious fiction, fairly clearly obvious. It doesn't actually take a genius. It really doesn't to sit down and pick it apart and be like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
And I'm not, and it's like, I think it is sometimes possible to affect change in your life. It is sometimes possible to will things into being, for want of a better way of putting it. Like, I'm not dismissing that. I'm certainly not dismissing effort either.
Not at all, no.
but I think that we find it so hard to acknowledge the basic truth that at pretty much any moment for pretty much any of us, all of our efforts could not just be in vain, but could end up turning on us.
Absolutely, yeah.
Could end up leading to our destruction, you know?
And I mean, another really profound thing about that acknowledgement, that we are all, that the notion of like conscious choice is actually massively flawed on almost every level. It's massively flawed. It leads us to a state of almost absolute sympathy and empathy when you take it to its logical conclusion, because you come to understand that even the people who do terrible things, who have terrible mindsets, are themselves products of unspoken influences that they have no control over, and that leads you to a degree of humanity that is actually quite profound. It's almost Zen, you know? It's almost Zen. It maybe doesn't diminish your anger, because of course there are levels of operation, obviously, you know. There's the immediate level of operation where you have to look at people in terms of the threat they pose to well-being, you know. But there's also the profounder state that derives from that. There's almost a utopian ideal that you can take from it. There's something you can work towards, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true, although there's also, sitting right alongside that really uneasily, there's the kind of pull of nihilism, right?
Yeah,
because there is a kind of feeling of like, well, fuck it.
There is that too, yes.
None of it makes any goddamn difference. And I think for me as well, the contradictory force that I have to hold in my head at all times when I'm feeling that way is to remind myself what is also true at the same time. And actually this, you know, everything we've just said informs that as well, is that nothing is inevitable.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's just as true. And actually, you know, that the very fact that we're not fully in control actually is part of what makes that true, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. There is there's a liberalizing quality to it, isn't there, where you... It means that you are not predetermined. It means that predeterminism itself is nonsense, yeah?
Yeah. And weirdly then, you do end up, or I find myself increasingly then, I end up coming full circle, and it's so do make the effort, do put your shoulder to the wheel, because it's the only fucking thing you can do.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's another thing as well. I agree with Oscar Wilde on this, who said that you know, the trick of life is being able to appreciate the beauty of being terribly deceived. I think that's absolutely true. There is when we have this problem certainly in our culture, and it derives from a lot of things. It derives from industrialism, it derives from capitalism, it derives from materialism, which is that we tend to look at things in very simple terms, in terms of like cause and effect, in terms of cost and deficit. And that has the effect of, it means that things that are ambiguous and that are even self-deceptions, things that are illusory, do have some kind of worth to us. You know, I've always been of the assertion that we operate more in abstract states than we do in any notion of delusion of an objective reality or a physical reality. And the more I read about it and the more I learn about it, the more that seems to be true on a very physical level. You know, when you actually start to look at like cosmological physics and quantum physics and all that kind of thing, it becomes very evident that that's true on lots of different levels. But it's very, 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 very true in terms of the internal life. It's very true in terms of like the abstract state of ethics and the notion of self and consciousness and whatnot. Just because something is not sort of absolutely physically true, tangibly true in front of you, and can be determined in its absolute state that this is this and this is that, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have worth, or that it's not significant. And in fact, it actually means the opposite. The things that are abstract, the things that a lot of people would consider to be delusions or illusory, are more true than the things that are factually true, or that are absolutely or physically true.
Yeah, and we certainly act that way, and in doing so we make it true, even if it wasn't before, right?
But it's like it's when you get right down to it and you start looking at things in like physical terms as well, and then you realize that even the assumption of what is physically true isn't. You know, it gets really shaky then when when you start to realize that like the act of you observing and analyzing something is actually changing it. Actually changing it. It's like, wow, okay. Okay.
You know, I mean, like the classic delusion I've got recently, and I've been experiencing this a lot lately, which is why it's in my mind, because I've kind of been, I've been in this situation for various reasons where I've been getting up and doing a task and then going back to bed for another hour because
Right.
I'm working from home.
Right,
And
of
basically what
course.
I'm doing now is sleeping through my commute, which is great. I get an extra
Right.
half an hour in bed, which is wonderful. But one of the side effects of that is it means that I'm drifting off into dream sleep and then being woken up by alarm. And it's happened a lot in the last couple of weeks, especially where I will have a dream and the dream will incorporate the alarm going off in such a way that when I first wake up, I feel as though I anticipated the alarm.
Right. Right.
So what's going on is the dream I have integrates the alarm in such a way that it temporarily tricks my brain into thinking
Uh-huh.
that I knew it was going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Now, I know it. I know what's going on. I know that actually what's happening, all of that stuff's happening at once in my head,
Yep.
and then it's applying a fake sense of history that works because I'm disoriented because I'm just waking up and it's a dream state, and time feels like it works differently in dreams. That's all that's really happening.
Yeah.
Like I understand it on an intellectual level, but the feeling is uncanny.
It really is,
You know,
isn't it?
deeply, deeply uncanny. And as I say, I'm only mentioning it because it's something I've been experiencing so much the last
Yeah.
couple of weeks in particular that it's really at the top of my mind. But it's a good example of that. And again, like if I did not have the benefit of the education and understanding that I've got of how minds work, I might start to get some very funny ideas
Oh, yeah.
indeed.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
About
I
the
mean,
power of my own mind
I'm-
and my dreams and what have you, you know.
I've discussed this with Lex, and I think I may have discussed it with Laura as well a couple of times. Is the magical thinking, the notion of magical thinking?
Yeah.
I'm so prone to it. I'm so
Yeah.
prone to it. It's something that has bedeviled like my entire life. Because it's a constant battle. You know, the patterns that you perceive in reality that aren't there. They are not there, but your mind just it insists that they are absolutely there. But because of like whatever malfunction is happening in the mind, it makes very odd connections and then derives very odd significances. I totally understand why people believe in magic. I totally get it. I totally get it. I totally understand superstition. I get it, you know, why people are afraid of numbers and whatnot, because I get that all the time. It's really weird. Like, and I don't know why. I don't know why. Certain numbers will freak me the fuck out sometimes.
See, I think it's a writer thing as well, though. I'm reminded of, and I can't remember which King book it is where he talks about this, but I think it's I think it might be one of the introductions to like a different seasons or Full Past Midnight. You know, they've got quite lengthy author introductions, and he riffs on a few things. But in one of those passages, in one of those collections, he talks about being a kid and the thing about how he remembers being at school and some kid telling him, "Oh, if you leave a dime on a train track, it will derail the train."
Yes, I remember that. Yes,
and he believes it. And then some other kid tells him, "If you leave a dime on a train track, it will be perfectly smooshed by the train and it will come out like a millimeter thick." And you know, and like whatever, like, you know, 20 centimeters across or something. And King sort of relays how he believed both things were true
simultaneously.
So the train would derail and you'd end up with a perfectly smooshed dime. Like, he really believed that. And there's a wonderful line where he talks about his wife. One of his wife's favorite things to tell guests when they come over for dinner is like, Stevie voted for Nixon twice. And then the punchline is like, you know, Nixon said he had a secret plan for getting out of Vietnam, and Stevie believed him.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And King's like, yeah, Stevie did, and that is far from the only thing Stevie has believed.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
It's an odd thing, isn't it? But it's even odder when you're conscious of it, I think.
Yeah.
When you know
absolutely.
that, like, this weirdness that's going on in your mind is not real.
Yeah.
It's just something you're superimposing on the world, or that you're perceiving, and in a way there's a kind of joy to be found from it, in that you can actually train yourself to step back from it and not be so stressed out by it, not to be so anxious about it, because it feeds anxiety like you wouldn't believe. I think it and anxiety really do go together. There is some sort of overlap there, I'm absolutely certain.
That's interesting.
It's so strange. It's so strange, and all it really is, it's like all mental illness. It's an exaggeration of things that all human beings do.
Yeah.
Which is where you place association with a particular experience or whatever onto a place or an object or a smell or whatever. It's where phobias are born. Some of the less rational phobias. So you've got like the evolutionary phobias, which are things like spiders and snakes and heights, and make perfect sense. But then you've got the non-evolutionary phobias, which are really strange. They're the associative phobias. So you've got people who have associative phobias with buttons on coats.
Right.
Or with the smell of baked beans.
Yeah.
And it's because they associate a particular experience with that sense, that image or that sense or whatever. And it can be very difficult to break. It can be very difficult to break because I think it's like depression, isn't it? Your mind will insist it's real and that it's rational. That's the other thing. Your mind will tell you, and it will perform every circumlocution, to insist that you are being perfectly reasonable and rational. You have to find like the second magpie, otherwise someone's going to die.
It can happen with the good feelings too, though. I will never forget as long as I live. So, like, again, I've played poker in my time, and I kind of I went through a little bit of time there where I just looked into gambling in general because I got interested in poker, and then once I'd learned how to play it, I was looking at the other casino games and trying to make sense of them and work out how they functioned and how they kind of. So by the time I went to Vegas for the first time, I knew the house edge on every major casino game. I knew the house edge on blackjack. I knew it on roulette. I knew I knew that there was such a thing as a house edge. I know in the long term, when you play those games, the house always wins, right? And I knew not. I didn't just know that, but I knew how, right? Like I understood the mechanism. So I'm there with a couple of mates, and we're there overnight. And one of them says, "Hey, you know what? Let's just go down to let's just go down to the tables and play something. Let's just gamble. Let's just take $100 each. Let's just have some fun." And I was like, "Yeah, okay." And we went and played roulette because it's the one that was easiest for us to understand. And
of course.
I figured out a system that I figured would help me lose money really slowly, where like you bet on you make two of the 1/3 bets, so you cover off 1 to 12 and then 12 to 24, and then what you do is you spread bet a load of smaller bets within the numbers there. So if you hit the top third, you lose. Otherwise, you get your money back, and you give yourself a chance of hitting a single number or whatever. But you're kind of hedging, basically. You're hedging, and it's, as I said, it's a way of losing money slowly, which is what I wanted to do. But I didn't lose money. I won because I just hit a streak and I was getting lucky. But I will never forget the feeling when I'd like piled up. So I'd made like a single money bet, and then I'd piled chips around that single money bet as well. So I had like a two-way bet here, there. And that number, whatever it was, came up, and the person puts the thing down, and this giant stack of chips is shoved across to me. And I thought to myself, oh, I've got the hang of this.
Yeah.
Right. I know what I'm doing. And it's like, the thing was, I simultaneously knew that was complete horseshit and believed it completely. I cannot tell you, because the feeling that it gave me defied all logic. Right. That's the scary part, because you see that pile of chips coming towards you, and there it is. There's the proof. You've cracked it. You've cracked roulette.
Right.
You have figured it out. And it's like, and and like all writers, I immediately kind of went, right, remember this. Remember how this feels.
Yeah, of course.
This is going to crop up in a book.
Record it. Yeah, absolutely. This is coming up again. This is going to turn up again.
But again, that's a useful kind of distancing thing too, right? Because you step back from it for a second. But I'll never forget the wave. And it was a physical feeling. I mean, a physiological feeling.
It's always stronger than people think, isn't it? That's what I find, whether it's negative or positive. Like the degree to which it will try to convince you of its own truth.
Absolutely.
It's so powerful.
As well as like now with the distance and the fact that I didn't end up with a gambling problem, I can look back on it and enjoy it. Right?
Yeah, of course.
I mean, I can, and it's a pleasurable memory to me now. But I'm also very, very conscious. Again, like if I hadn't done the homework beforehand, where might that feeling have led me?
Well, God, I mean, it it can take you down some such dark roads, can't it?
Yeah.
The notion of magical thinking. I mean, it can lead you into fairly benign areas as well, where you just become like obsessed with kind of silly things, lifestyle things like crystals and whatnot, and which can again can lead to very dark stuff in and of itself. When you convince yourself they can actually heal you of things and whatnot.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, when I was young, it led me to occultism. I was well into that, but I was rational enough and sort of distanced enough to understand that it wasn't doing anything. It was, there was no like actual magical effect from whatever rites you perform. That it's psychological. The experience is psychological and emotional more than external or metaphysical, and in that there's worth. I mean, I still like the rituals. I still like the rituals and the imagery. I find fascinating. There's something really beautiful about it, and it can. I mean, I discussed this with Lex as well. It can have the effect that it places you in a mind state where you are more energized and more effective.
Yeah, definitely.
It gives you that feeling of potency and of power and of agency in the world. And that's the magic. That's where the true magic lies, I mean, don't get me wrong. If I ever found anything that actually works, then the world would end.
Yeah, we see you later.
Oh, you don't want to know what would happen.
Where's George gone? He's gone to the 5th dimension.
You don't want to
know what he's bringing back.
No, you don't want to know. It'd be like end of Evangelion, man. It would be crazy batshit.
Yeah,
but I mean,
the one for me, funnily enough, you're saying that. I mean, the one for me that I always really appreciated was tarot. Like, I always got on really well with tarot because I think that. I mean, I was talking. I mean, my dad's so funny because my dad's like. I always think of him as like an arch rationalist in a lot of ways. Like, he's kind of. I think he's still got kind of new atheist tendencies. If I'm honest, I worry about it sometimes. Like, it's quite hardcore. But like, I remember talking to him about it, and he just casually. We were walking. This is a couple of years back now, but we were walking and talking. He's like, "Oh yeah, I got an I Ching app on my phone," and I just stared at like, "What you doing? What?" And he said, "Yeah, and I know it'll work because all it really does is give you a set of symbols for your mind to pour patterns into."
That's it.
And I'm very good at doing that. And actually, I will find it a useful thing to do, and so I will do it.
I mean, that's the fun thing about stuff like the I Ching and tarot and whatnot is that you can use them as foci.
Absolutely.
It focuses your mind, and it can allow you. They were like dreams, It allows you to unconsciously unravel certain things, as long as you understand that that's what you're doing, and it's not magic.
Yeah, and I think for people as well, I mean, going back to the writer thing, I think if your imagination works in a particular way, sometimes you can use something like that to help you make those intuitive leaps.
Yeah, totally.
That's what, make those connections that you wouldn't otherwise have made and just see things from a different angle or whatever.
Absolutely, yeah.
Again, as you say, there can be a lot of value in that.
There really can, and I think it dilutes them when it's very like religion in that regard for me. I think that the stories themselves, like the mythologies, are diluted by literalism.
Yeah,
massively diluted. Their human sanctity, their sacredness is actually diluted by the insistence that they are literally true, or that there's something like magically happening. It's far more interesting to me when the demons and the angels are within us. That is far more interesting to me. When we are both heaven and hell, we are the haunted houses, we are everything. It's all in us. That is far more fascinating to me. And energizing and powerful and potent. That's where the true sorcery lies,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Again, if I ever find a way of expressing that externally, then humanity is done.
I'm keeping all of my puzzle boxes the hell away from me.
Oh yeah,
just in case.
Good idea. Good idea. Pinhead was frankly had no vision. Amateur. Absolute amateur. Leviathan wants to get in touch with me. Definitely. I'm kind of more Chenard, I'm more on that side of things,
I think I hesitated.
Yeah, go and find it, go and find the... I mean, that's something I find Barker understands. He gets it. He gets it. He understands why it's attractive. He understands why you would go in search of the darkness, why you would want to touch it, why you would want to see an angel or a demon or a monster.
Yeah.
Again, it's something I've discussed with Lex because we did one about hauntings and about ghosts and things.
Right.
I would love to have the experience. I would love to have the experience. I would love to see something or to experience something that shook me, that shook my understanding of reality and suggested a kind of metaphysics or whatever. I've just never had it,
Right.
I've never had it. And it's a funny thing, isn't it? Because it's a very difficult conversation to have with people, especially if they're invested in the idea, in the story.
Absolutely.
I don't doubt that people have the experience. It's just that I consider it to be more psychological than supernatural,
Yeah, I mean, but that's the thing, isn't it? Like, I mean, I think I've had I have had versions of the experience. It's just I have an explanation for it that's not supernatural. That's
exactly.
all.
Exactly.
And I mean, I am of the firm belief that there is no such thing as the supernatural in any case. I mean, that's where I come down. And what that means is not that there aren't things that are unexplained.
My God, no.
And not that there may even be some things that are inexplicable.
Yep.
Like that, there may well be limits to what the human mind can comprehend. There probably are. Let's face it.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that, like, for me, I mean, I've thought, I don't know, I always come back to like wanting to write. Well, I kind of have, I guess. The novel I've worked on with James does have a kind of. It does contain the supernatural within it. There are supernatural elements in that story, and I have written stories of supernatural elements. But I always right. But I think when I write them, and I think you're the same actually. Thinking about it, they aren't supernatural.
No, that's it.
Then there are natural occurrences that happen in that world.
That's right. Yeah, it's like the very notion of the supernatural is problematic, isn't it? I mean, where do you draw the distinction? There was a time when light bulbs would have been supernatural.
Right. Absolutely. Well, yeah. Absolutely.
And miraculous. It's just a phenomena or an experience that happens within a set of parameters that we haven't explored or can't explore. That's all. And in that regard, it's part and parcel of reality, however abstruse or weird that gets, If we do find that there are like invisible Lovecraftian entities all around us all the time, well, fine, that's the way it is, isn't it? That's the way it is,
Yeah. But the idea of, I mean, and that is, I think, a religious concept at its core, the idea of something outside of nature.
Yeah.
Because my thing is, like, even if there's a God, God's part of nature.
Exactly.
I mean, I really that's it for me.
I mean, that comes back to Lovecraft. I mean, that's something really to take away from Lovecraft's writings. The fact that, for everything else that's wrong with them, which is a lot, the fact that he was one of the very first writers to come up with this notion that even if there are things that appear to be not just supernatural but like divine or infernal, they are just entities that operate in spheres that we can't comprehend. That's all. I mean Lovecraft goes down like the nihilist route with that, obviously, and it's like, they're just awful. just by existing they drive humanity mad, and like, it's awful, it's terrible, everything is awful. But there's also some incredible hope in that concept, I find.
Yeah, and I think that that's where Barker works in the same way, doesn't he?
Yeah,
Barker
just goes down the opposite route. He just goes totally down the opposite route. He takes it down the notion of transcendence, of like the experience is beautiful and transcending and wonderful. Just knowing that it occurs is wonderful,
But also the planes you travel to are real. They function with a different set of rules, but they do function according to a set of rules. They have their own politics, they have their own religion, they have their own magic, they have their own, everything that you would expect a place to have. They have their own version of consciousness. They have their own, life, death rituals. All of that stuff is there. And it never feels supernatural.
No, not ever.
It just feels like an extension of nature through a as yet unseen dimension.
Yeah, it's another set, isn't it? It's another set of parameters and assumptions. That's all. And I think what is happening in like fantasy fiction and horror fiction to a lesser degree is that those very clear parameters which existed in tradition are dissolving. So you are getting this wonderful overlap of what is considered to be the real and the fantastical, where the two feed into one another and actually become functions of one another. Gaiman does it all the time. China Miéville does it all the time. Barker is one of the arch godfathers of it, obviously. It's taking that distinction you get in C.S. Lewis, where you've got the fantastical world and the real world, and smooshing them together, dissolving those lines,
Yeah, the other place I always think of for that was really kind of, even though I never actually played it, was seemed very important to me conceptually as a kid, was Shadowrun.
Shadowrun, yeah.
Which did a great job of like taking Tolkien and smashing it into cyberpunk and just saying,
yeah.
It's all real.
It's all real, yeah. Because that is such a weird thing, isn't it? You know, because Cyberpunk wasn't like that initially. It was just like straight down the line Matrix style cyberpunkery.
Yeah.
And then they introduce elves and goblins and all sorts of weirdness. Dragons. It's all real. It's all real. It's all there. But they've also got cybernetic bits and whatnot. I mean, it's
Deckers and all that stuff.
It's kind of brilliant. It's kind of wonderful. I mean, even like your high fantasy mythologies do it now. So you look at like the Dungeons and Dragons realms, for example. Even they set up this very science fiction existentialism now, where the realm, whatever realm you play your game in, it's just one of a set of infinite realities where all permutations are played out. You know.
Did I ever tell you about the D&D campaign I ran on that school?
I don't think you did. No.
So, like, I had a thing where I wanted to run a D&D campaign, but I wanted to run a bunch of classic modules, and I didn't have a mechanism for doing it easily, and I didn't want to have to design a coherent world.
It takes a long time.
Exactly, it's a lot of work. But, like, I had Castle Greyhawk, which is
my God,
amazing set of spoof dungeons.
Yeah.
Which I loved, but the trouble with Greyhawk was each dungeon was like levels 1 to 2, levels 3 to 4, levels 5 to 6, and there wasn't enough going on in each dungeon to level the players
because
up.
They never finished it, did they? They never finished, like, there was supposed to be more in those dungeons, but they just never got it done, you know?
But you couldn't, like, the problem was that you couldn't level up enough in Dungeon 1 to get to Dungeon 2 and survive, basically. And I wanted to run the whole thing. So I was like, well, I need to run other adventures in between, but I couldn't be asked with the idea of trying to... And what it hit on was I just whammied the party with what I called the Quantum Leap curse. I had a demon appear and just say, right, you're going to leap from place to place. And they weren't even putting right what once went wrong. They were generally making things wronger, actually. I don't think the party ever twigged that I was doing that to them. But what it really meant was I could just do they get to the end of Castle Greyhawk and they just finish the final encounter and they'd be the huge sigh of relief, and then I'd whammy them with the spell. They'd leap out and they'd appear in, like, outside the Temple of Elemental Evil.
Yeah.
And then clear the first level of that, level up enough. Oh, they're back in Greyhawk. We've got to do level 2 of Greyhawk now. And it just meant I could run whatever the hell. And they ended up in Ravenloft. They ended up all over the place.
That's very clever, actually, because it does give
really fun.
It gives you the opportunity to, like, introduce the players to all these wonderful places and settings, and you get to play around as well as the DM, obviously, you know, with all the stuff you've always wanted to, but can't within the restrictions of a normal campaign, you know.
And you find a way of it frees you from most of the kind of what I find the baggage of continuity that you can get with the D&D campaign. But it still is a campaign. You still have the same characters. They're leveling up. They're building their relationships. I mean, they got stuck with an NPC from the first level of Castle Greyhawk called Poppin' Fresh, the cookie dough golem. And there was this whole thing where, like, you know, the party could fight him or they befriend him, and they befriended him, and he ended up like a level 6 cookie golem. I think he did get killed in the end. But the thing is, you know, this is classic GM, right? These are warning to GMs: do not introduce the throwaway character and give him a stupid squeaky voice. Because you'll be doing that squeaky voice for the next 2 years.
You want to be careful when you're a DM of what you introduce.
It was just like, hey, everybody, I'm coming back. And, like, it seemed so, because, like, he's going to die in 5 seconds. You don't know. 2 years. 2 years of playing that character in that awful squeaky voice.
There is the guys who, like, produce D&D do, like, a regular campaign called Acquisitions Incorporated, and it's all online. It's great fun. It's really cool. But there is a character that what the DM introduced in that, which is a lizard that talks, and he only talks in words that end in tion. So it's like, and he speaks with a French accent, so it's like direct. So it's like direction, malédiction. That's how he speaks. And of course they had to get rid of that character as soon as possible, because he is very hard to do.
No, that's it. He just, like,
it's just very hard to do, you know. Although you can have a lot of fun with that shit. I mean, you could just go to town. The silly characters you can create, or the menacing characters you can create, is
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
it's so much fun. That's one thing I need to get done after this period. A good game of either D&D or Paranoia or something, Cyberpunk, anything.
Well, I bought my kid the D&D rule set and DM guide for Christmas.
Oh,
so
lovely! Those are
really
lovely
hoping.
books too. You know, they're
Yeah.
lovely books. There's a lot of them out there now.
Yeah.
I'm
So,
finding it difficult getting them all. You know.
so I'm really hoping it'll click with her, and hopefully we can run a little I'll run a little solo campaign for her or something.
I mean,
yeah.
It is intimidating when you first start because it looks really complex, and actually, it's not.
No,
it's not. It really
no,
isn't.
absolutely.
But yes, I suppose. I mean, you know, I was trying to find like a natural segue, but who cares? We are here to actually talk about your books. You know, let's just go like with that. That can be the segue. Yeah?
There you go.
There we are. Kit's here to actually talk about two books, which I believe we've mentioned before. We just haven't like expounded on them to any great degree. The Finite, of course, which, you know, we'll warn people about that one. And A Song for the End, which is they occur in the same universe, technically, but are very like profound. What I got from reading them is how profoundly different they are in terms of tone.
Yeah,
The ethos of them is completely different. Like the Finite is an elegy. The Finite is like a lament. It's incredibly dark. It's nihilistic, isn't it? I mean, it really is phenomenally dark. Fair warning to anyone out there. Basically, the best analog I can come up with is When the Wind Blows, which it is obviously it's partially inspired by. Whereas A Song for the End is punk. Yeah. It's punk. It's complete, like, tonally so different.
Yeah.
So different. And it works really well in that continuity's favor because it actually comes as a surprise when the stuff that's referred to in the Finite actually happens.
Right.
You know, it works really, really well because it leaves you with this sense of, oh, right, you know.
Yeah.
Which is a nice feeling.
That's good to hear, yeah, because I mean, you're right, they are very, and that was completely deliberate. I mean, when I was sitting down to write A Song for the End, I mean, I had to write it quickly. I was under quite an aggressive deadline for that one for various reasons, and I had, funnily enough, I can't remember the order now, but I think I had the first 4,000 words of A Song for the End sitting around for a very long time.
Right.
I think I started trying to write that not long after Godbomb. Actually, I'm trying to remember whether I did the Finite first or so. I think it went Godbomb, Finite, A Song for the End, but I abandoned A Song for the End very quick. It was back then. It was called The Truth Shall Set You Free for obvious reasons.
For obvious reasons, yeah.
That was the working title for most of the.
By the way, ladies and gents, the likelihood of spoilers is really high. So if you haven't read the books, go read them first. Links down below. Go read them first, yeah.
Yeah. But I remember I got about 4,000 or 5,000 words. I got to the first classroom scene in it where he's reading Lord of the Flies. I'd written that, and I was just finding it really, really hard. And I thought it was okay, but I just didn't quite feel like I had the chops to write it yet.
Right.
So I left it, and I went on and did some other short stories, and I did some other work, and then I think A Warning About Your Future Enslavement ended up taking over, and I did that, and then I was off to the races with various other projects. And when I got approached by Horrific and they said, "Can you do us a novella?" I said, "Of course." And then I thought, "Oh shit! Now I've got to write."
Now I've got to write a novella. Yeah.
Yeah. And I had an idea for one, and I kind of started mapping it out in my head, and I thought that's probably going to work. And it's still an idea I intend to write, by the way, at some point. Working title for that one's Day of the Milkshake, but I haven't quite got it mapped out yet. But then at some point, this idea bubbled back up. The Truth Shall Set You Free, and I thought, I'll just have a look and see if it's any good,
Mm-hmm.
because I couldn't at that point. It had been long enough. I couldn't remember if I'd stopped because it was starting to suck, or if I'd stopped because it was too hard.
Hit a jam, yeah.
Yeah, and I went back to it and I read it, and I was pleased to discover it was actually okay.
Yeah.
In fact, it was pretty good, and I felt a level of confidence I didn't feel at the time when I was writing it, because I'd spent 5 years writing other stuff in between, or 4 years, whatever. I was just a better writer, which is encouraging.
Yeah.
And I found I picked it up very, very quickly, and it just kind of it did come pretty smooth, actually. Did
that sort of that production time, the fact that it was written quite quickly, is that part of what informed why it's so punchy and why it's so like the prose is so immediate and like just the way it hits and the way it flows, it's very sort of like very elegant the way it's written. It just like this happens and this happens, it's very and it's got that very punkish like whack whack whack, hasn't it? The way the prose works, that's what I was getting from it as I was reading it. It's got an almost like a being punched quality about it.
Yeah, I think certainly I wanted it to have a relentless pace, because I knew it was going to take place basically over the course of well, actually, it's a morning, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not long, is it? It's really not long.
Because they get to London around midday, so actually it's pretty much the morning of the beginning of the end of the world.
I mean, that feeds in really lovely into the overarching theme of the whole thing, doesn't it? Which is the the notion that what we've got is really fragile and it doesn't take long to just collapse.
Absolutely. And I think that. So I think that certainly so there was a conscious decision. I wanted it to have that kind of relentless pacing. And I actually think probably the reason I'd abandoned it where I had was because I wasn't quite sure what would happen next. I didn't at that point feel as confident juggling characters in the way that the narrative does, and this is going to sound strange because obviously it's a novel, not a play, but it's got A Song for the End's got a big cast.
Yeah.
Compared to anything I've written before. God Bomb's very contained, actually. Although there's 80 people in the room, you only interact with 9 of them.
Right. Obviously the Finite, has...
Finite's just a two-hander, basically.
Right.
And most of my stuff's quite compact and contained by inclination. I think that's... And I don't know what that's about. But there was certainly a confidence level, confidence deficit when I started A Song for the End about pulling off... a bigger cast, I think, is really what it came down to. And for some reason, I just, since then I gained more confidence, and that's certainly, I certainly feel like I hit my stride with that. And I think, because it's interesting, the coming out of the class, because I'd literally left it with the alarm going off, and that was where I'd left the narrative. And I immediately I could see what the next 2 or 3 steps were going to be, and then I just kind of trusted that if I plowed forward that the narrative would kind of work itself out, and it would
just go. It would just come. And I mean that seems to have created a kind of naturalism in the way the story works, because it does just like move from one point to the next in a very logical manner.
Well, I mean, I'm following the injunction of like speculative fiction, which is like you change one element of reality and then you say, okay, given that you've changed that one element, at that point, what would really happen?
What would actually happen, and how would people actually react?
Exactly.
It's very interesting when you bring in other people. Once you've established what's happening, you get other characters occurring within that situation. So of course, I mean, the big one is going to be Luke. That was quite surprising, and it does set up really interesting context for the Finite. Then, of course, it actually makes the Finite even worse, even more tragic. Even more tragic and awful because like. The fact it's that line where he says I don't love him anymore. I was like, what, fucking Jesus. So it's kind of, it makes you feel that awful thing. Well, in a way it's better that he doesn't get home, because the story that would have erupted is even worse, is even more tragic and awful. If you're standing in the ruins of civilization and, you know, your only slither of hope is that maybe somewhere out there your partner's going to get back, and then they get back and you realise that they don't love you at all and they've actually just been tolerating you.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a dark thing, man. That's a really wow.
Well, yeah. Yeah, and I don't know. I think part of that is about the fact that it for completely understandable reasons, Luke is kind of.
I get it. No, that's the worst thing. I get it because like. He explains it quite well. Well, he hasn't got any choice, has he? Because he's got to tell you, you know, because of the sort of mechanism that's happening. He hasn't got any choice. He's got to tell you in the way you know, it's got to be the truth. It's got to be the very bare bones truth. And he explains why.
Yeah.
He tells you why he doesn't love him anymore, and it's like, yeah, I get it. You know, I totally understand why.
It sucks, but I get it. Yeah. Well, this is it, and I just think there's something about like. I mean, you know, I guess it's kind of one of the things we were kind of circling around before, the fact that you can't really ever know anybody else,
right.
You know? Right. You can't ever really know yourself fully, but you certainly can't know anybody else. And I think that, yeah, I mean, it was interesting to me as soon as I kind of, and I knew what the song was going to do, that idea was there from the very beginning.
So you knew exactly like what the effect was going to be.
Yeah.
And what like,
I knew how that was going to play out. In that sense, I knew the impact it was going to have.
I mean, one thing I wanted to ask after reading it is like, have you ever thought about like why, like the metaphysics of it, why it has that effect, and where it comes from, you know? Because I mean, obviously the book isn't about that. That's not the point, is it? You know, that's not the point of A Song for the End. It's about what it does. It's about its effects, you know. And it would have belabored the book to go into that too deeply.
Yeah.
Which is why it doesn't, you know, it doesn't.
I toyed with the idea. At one point, I remember thinking, like, what if Jeff's an occultist and actually he's engineered this?
Yeah,
you know, like I did. It occurred to me, and I kind of played with it for a little while, and then I thought, nah. I prefer. I mean, I like it being unknowable. That's the first thing. What I think it is just an accident.
Yeah.
I think it's just that they hit the right notes in the right order, and it's you know what we're talking about before. It's a magical thing. It's a thing that we didn't know could happen because no one had done it until someone did.
And it just does. It just happens to have this effect on people. Yeah.
And it like I think there's echoes. So one of the echoes, and it's not exact because they're just trying to write a song, and so it's not a fair comparison. But there's a thing that I've never gotten out of my head about Oppenheimer writing about the first nuclear tests, you know, and they're out in the Nevada desert and they're about to press the button, and basically he's not completely sure that the bomb isn't just going to keep exploding.
Yes, I remember reading that. My God, how terrifying.
They're just the atoms just aren't going to keep dividing in an exponential way, and it's just going to burn the entire fucking planet to a cinder. Like he doesn't think it's going to happen. He thinks entropy's going to kick in, but he's not sure.
Yeah. I remember reading that and just like going cold. You know.
Well, there's a writer, Harry Turtledove, who wrote this wonderful series of alt history science fiction stories about we're halfway through World War II and the lizards land and start invading Earth and the entire planet has to realign itself as to be Earth versus the lizards.
Right.
But the gag in that is the lizards scanned the planet like 4,000 years ago and saw people with like iron swords and furs and just thought, oh great, we'll invade there, and came back 4,000 years later and we're driving around in tanks and airplanes. They're like, what the fuck is going on here?
Yes.
because to the lizard, right, the lizards have evolved a very methodical way, and they're like, you put each foot down in front of you and test the ground carefully. So like their civilization's built up literally over millennia.
Right.
They cannot conceive of humanity's just insane oh fuck it, let's try it kind
Yeah.
of approach
Yeah,
to
yeah.
science. They cannot consider, and it's like, they get to the point where the lizards, like in book 3 or whatever, I think they discover that the humans are about to build an atomic bomb, and they're like, they cannot possibly know this is safe. What are they doing? Like, why are they doing this? What is wrong with these people? And it's that perspective has always stayed with me, and like, yeah, we are kind of fucking mental.
Kind of is how it happens, isn't it? I mean, you only have to look at like the history of things like surgery,
right?
Like the stuff that people just did,
Yeah,
just to they thought it'd work, so they just did it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely, and the shit that we try just to see if it will work,
I always remember like there's a great I love Vesalius, the anatomist from the Victorian era who drew all of these beautiful. It's what inspired Skinless Frank from Hellraiser.
Right.
He drew all of these beautiful anatomical drawings of skinless people doing domestic things to demonstrate how musculature works and how ligaments works and whatnot. Sure. And there's a story of him because of course surgery back then was like a matter of like, it was a seminar. You'd have all the medical students crowded around and they'd be watching. A guy on the slab, and his heart stops, and Vesalius cuts him open at the belly and reaches inside of him up underneath the rib cage and grabs his heart, palpates it, and it starts again, and the guy survives.
Jeez.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. We are just bonkers, aren't we? We're just such a bonkers species.
But yeah, I mean, and also within the realm of music, it also feeds into like cultural myth, isn't it? Because ever since music has been recorded, there has been the superstitious myth of the music that alters your mind or alters your brain or does something terrible. You play the record backwards, it's going to open a gate to hell or turn you into a serial killer or something.
Definitely. So there's two sides to it. One is the moral panic side, but the other thing that fed it very strongly for me was, and this is, I think I've spoken about this elsewhere, but basically it's like part of where it came from was me thinking about the music that I love, and especially the political music that I love. And the weird thing about like how music doesn't change the world, even though it feels like it should, right?
Yes.
So you think about like, I mean, I think about bands like the Levellers or Rage Against the Machine or, Dylan in his heyday, although, Dylan's motivations were always fairly opaque, but you listen to the songs certainly and you think like, well, why didn't The Hour When the Shit Comes In change the world? Why didn't Bomb Track or Killing in the Name of change the world? Why didn't Battle of the Beanfield change the world? I don't, and the answer is because that's not how music works, and that's not
how it works.
It doesn't have that power. But what if it did?
If it did? Yeah.
And that's where the idea came from, and that was long before the narrative. That was back when I was still in a band. That idea came to me. I just kind of filed it away,
Yeah. What if you could write that song, like the ultimate revolutionary song that inspires people and that transforms their state of mind and consciousness? That elevates them.
So that was there, and then I just thought, and then it just seemed to me to be more. When I came to write it, it just seemed to me to be more interesting to have it happen by accident.
Right. And the effect is really interesting as well. Like in the way it manifests, it's really fascinating. Like when it starts to actually have like the physiological effects if they try to stop it.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating.
So, okay, so that's a bit mechanical, right? Because part of that is about the fact that I want to write horror story.
Yeah, and also, I mean, for it to work, it needs that, doesn't it? Because if not, people will just not say anything. They could just remain silent and it's fine,
Yes, yeah. I had to get past that somehow. I had to get past the compulsion to just... Because you're right, everyone's instinct would just be to go mute.
Yeah.
Right? And then just like... until you can find a pair of earplugs and then people will stop asking you questions and then you don't have to... So I had to get beyond that somehow. And of course, part of that is the impulse. It's not just about the truth, it's the complete truth.
Yeah.
You can't prevaricate. You can't say half of what you're thinking.
No, it's like... And it's stuff that even surprises the characters, where they don't know it's the truth. They don't know it's what they felt like or what they would do, what they were feeling at the time. That's really... Oof.
Well, that was a fun idea because that's something that didn't that's something that didn't, I don't think, initially even occur to me. It was only when I started writing that I discovered that almost on the page, and I thought, oh wow, that's got possibilities.
Yeah.
And the kind of, I mean, one of the characters makes a very kind of very ableist comment about it, doesn't he? He describes himself as having been turned into fucking Rain Man, and it's kind of
yes, I think
that might have been Luke actually, which is quite unpleasant kind of, but like, you know, I think fitting with the character, but there is a certain truth to that, in the sense of like, one of the things that, I mean, we're back to what we talked about earlier, in fact, in terms of belief. One of the things I do believe, I have no evidence really for this, but I do believe that somewhere in our brains, not in our consciousness, by the way, most of it, I think, in our subconscious, is stored everything that's ever happened to us.
Yeah.
We can't access most of it, but I do believe it's in the grey matter somewhere. I really do believe this. I believe that it's all in there somewhere, and most of it's in the subconscious, stored in very unreliable long-term memory,
very strange ways,
in very strange ways. But I do believe it's there somewhere.
Yeah,
like, and that's an article of faith, really. I don't have any evidence for that, but it is what I believe. And so, yeah, part of what the effect of the song gives you is suddenly you can access all that.
Yeah, so it sort of punches through the barrier, whatever, like. It becomes permeable. It's not absolute anymore.
But only when triggered, and that's the other thing that I like about it. So it's not that you can suddenly remember everything. It's that if someone asks you,
it gives you it's almost like a form of Tourette's in a way, isn't it? It just comes out, doesn't it? There's no, it's right. Like you can't help it. That I really love, like the shock of it.
Yeah. And I think my favourite moment in that regard is when, I mean, the moment when they discover it is, I think it's when he realises that he's seen his bandmate and he's seen the car, even though at the time his mind was somewhat otherwise occupied, thinking he was going to die, so he didn't register that he'd seen it.
So it's allowing you access to things that you didn't have before. It's giving you almost like an extrasensory perception.
Yeah. But then what I like is the way he demonstrates, because Luke is
skeptical.
Luke is skeptical, right? Yeah. And then he says to Luke, just tell me what you were doing on this day when you were 5 years old. And Luke immediately responds with this, this image of himself on his father's lap watching the Muppets on TV. And then he has this kind of like,
I mean, the story could have so easily gone another way there, couldn't it? Like, in terms of like what happens to the wider world, it could have, like, in a better timeline, I suppose, it could have facilitated a transformation of what humanity is.
Well,
as Jeff thinks it will,
There's room for a sequel.
Yeah, I think you said you were writing. There is another one to tell, isn't there?
Well, there's a third in what I'm thinking of as the trilogy of what I'm thinking of as the Milton Keynes Apocalypse trilogy.
That's great.
So we've got The Finite, we've got A Song for the End, and there is a third called Millionaire's Day, which I've got about, I think I've got about 8,000 words down on that one now. And I don't know, that might end up being a novel rather than a novella, we'll see. But again, actually, funny enough, that I think may just cover the first morning of a very different apocalypse.
Right, got you.
A very different apocalypse.
Oh, okay.
I don't think I've seen this one before, which I'm quite pleased.
Interesting.
Yeah, mind you, I don't think I've seen A Song for the End.
I was going to say, I don't think I've seen a song. I've seen like permutations of it, because in a way there is a Lovecraftian element to it, isn't there? Because it's the notion of knowledge that can corrupt. The notion that there are certain, I don't know, configurations of symbols that can drive you mad, or like images that can affect your state of mind. It's very Lovecraftian in that regard.
Is that I think the other direct influence I have to cop to is Chuck Palahniuk, who did a novel called Lullaby.
Yeah.
And Lullaby is certainly an influence on it, because Lullaby introduces the idea of a magical song.
Right.
And the magic. Do you know Lullaby?
I don't know Lullaby specifically. I know most of Chuck's work though.
So firstly, read Lullaby because it's absolutely awesome. But this is literally the back of the book, elevator pitch for Lullaby. So I'm really not spoiling the narrative.
No worries.
Literally, the setup is this man learns a song, and if he sings that song to someone else, that person then dies the next day of apparently natural causes.
Right, okay.
So overnight, this person gains the power of life and death over every single person they meet with no consequences whatsoever.
Oof.
Now that's a phenomenal idea.
Yeah, it is. Right? It is, and it has that sort of urban legend quality about it as well, doesn't it? It's kind of cool. It's kind of cool.
It's what I love about it is it's kind of what we were talking about earlier. It's not supernatural. It's just a bit of nature we didn't understand. It's a new phenomenon we're not aware of somehow.
Right.
But what I also love about it is that even if you knew what he was doing, you have no recourse. There's nothing in our current system of laws and control that can touch that power.
Right.
And that fascinated me. Just the idea of that.
Just really absolutism. It's almost like... It's godlike, isn't it? Almost?
Yeah, it is godlike, and obviously, Palahniuk takes it in a very particular direction. And I mean, it's a great novel. I don't want to spoil any of it beyond, because that's literally the setup, and everyone should read that because it's fantastic. Now, obviously, the Song and a Song for the End works very, very differently, and I'm not, differently enough that I'm not worried about talking about the line of influence, because I think I take the whole thing in a completely different direction. And even the effect itself on how the song works is different, actually. But that idea, the idea of a magical song, and the other strand that is the same in both stories, I think, is that fact that because it's happening outside of general understanding of how the world works, we as a society, as a structure, are just completely unable to combat it.
Yes, now that's another fascinating element to the book, because the collapse happens really quickly. Really quickly. There's a lot going on that's sort of implied under the surface as well. The notion that everything we've built relies on the ability to lie. From families, there is. I mean, there is an element of uncomfortable truth to it, isn't there? As from family structures right up to nations and governmental structures. There's a very potentially very dark commentary there.
Well, that's the thing, and that is what I kind of wanted to get at. And it's interesting, actually, the first draft. So this is a good example of writing to deadline where it's a bad thing. The first draft of the novella, literally ended because I was like, what's the minimum word count? And I got to the minimum word count. I was like, right, wrap it up. And they were halfway down the M1, so I just had the cars crash together on the M1, and then had this big kind of physical confrontation. Then Jeff ends up getting shot through the head, and then actually, funnily enough, the punchline is exactly the same as the punchline to the note in terms of how the virus then gets spread beyond it. How the song ends up perpetuating. So that coda is the same, but the story was completely truncated. And I've got to give Horrific all credit. I said it to them, and Graham Reynolds, the editor there, very, very politely sent it back and said, "This is very good, but can I have my third act, please?" I was like, damn it.
You definitely need more payoff for the Jeff character, don't you? Because
his whole thing was you can't set up the riot in Parliament Square and then not deliver it.
And not have it,
cannot do that. It's not allowed. And I was like, all right. I just wanted to get it in on time.
It would feel. You would. I mean, the reader would feel shortchanged, wouldn't they, if you've set it up. Absolutely. And there is a part of you, the awful part of you, because I found it really ambiguous, actually. I kind of got Jeff, I kind of understood what he wanted, the revolutionary in me is like, yeah, fuck it, do it.
Well, this is it. Jeff, and the nice thing about Jeff is, of course, Jeff can't lie either.
Right, yeah.
So when Jeff gives you his pitch, he is completely sincere.
He's completely
in everything
honest.
He's saying. Now, that doesn't make him right, obviously.
No, but he believes he's right.
Does. Yeah. This is Jeff's truth.
Yeah.
And he doesn't say anything that's not true.
No, he doesn't. And I really resonated with what he was saying. I really did. And it's very interesting because it sets up a really uncomfortable tension for the reader, where they're like, what do I do? With whom do I side? The character, the protagonist that the book has been following, or the character that in any other narrative would be the antagonist.
Yeah. I mean, he is the antagonist of the narrative still, because we're stuck with Bill, so he is the antagonist. But antagonist is not the same as villain. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing. And I look as well. I mean, not to kind of. I mean, we've given the spoiler tag, so we might as well. But one of the things that's interesting to me is that by the end of the narrative, when those two have their final confrontation, Bill is motivated purely by a very personal and quite petty sense of vengeance.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jeff is the only one who's really thought about it.
Yeah,
he's the one who sees the song and thinks about it and thinks about the potential of it.
Yeah.
Rather than just being afraid of dissolving the status quo.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, you see, Jeff works it out actually straight away. Because if you think about it, Jeff doesn't know what the effect of the song is until they turn up on his doorstep.
Right.
And literally in between them turning up on his doorstep and Jeff making a cup of tea, he's processed it.
Yeah.
And he's worked out what neither of them have.
Mm-hmm.
Or just don't want to. And, you know, and he's like, actually, no, we're going a different way, guys. I've decided we're going to do something quite different. And I like Jeff. I wouldn't want to know him. I think he's quite a scary man.
Probably, he probably is. But there is.
I have sympathy with his perspective.
Yeah, massively so. Massively so.
But the point is, you're right. The point is that the underlying point is like, our entire current societal structure relies on us lying to ourselves and each other every single day.
Every single day, and in every tiny way, yeah.
It's woven into the fabric, as you say, from the microcosm of the family unit through to the national structures that we rely on. And it did kind of, again, change one thing and then ask what would really happen.
Yeah, just something very tiny, something very small, and watch it go. I mean, in many respects, it very much reflects what's going on now, doesn't it? Where something ostensibly, on a historical level, quite small, has come along and shaken the world to its foundations,
Well, it's funny, actually. I was speaking to someone about it who was looking for a piece purely as an exercise. They were looking for something to try and do a film script adaptation.
Right.
And they were literally like, I've only got a couple of months, so I actually can't invent a story from zero. Have you got anything that I can look at? And I was like, yeah, sure. And I sent them the Finite, I sent them the Song for the End, and I sent them, I can't remember, Breaking Point, I think. And I said, look, if any of them work, I mean, again, it's just for an exercise. So I'm like, yeah, whatever you want to use and do what you want. And she started reading a Song for the End, and she got back to me and said, like, she said, do you think this is and bear in mind she's like a third of the way through, so she hasn't got to a lot of the bigger political. She said, do you think this is almost like a period piece or something? Because it feels in 2020, this feels already a bit, and I was like, no, it's totally a period piece. It's set in 2018, and that's really the only year it makes any sense.
Yes, right.
And she said, yeah, because in 2020, a virus that makes everybody tell the truth, we're kind of doing that, aren't we?
Yeah, right.
I guess.
History has a sense of irony sometimes, doesn't it? It really does,
Well, it's kind of weird.
It is kind of strange. It is kind of weird. And they would be very different films as well. I mean, it's not like you could, let's say if like, you had the means of producing both The Finite and A Song for the End, you couldn't do them as like a double act.
No.
Because they're so tonally different. People wouldn't take it. They wouldn't accept it,
Yeah, no,
it's very interesting because like A Song for the End would be so much more racy and so much more action packed and so much more movement,
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's it. I think A Song for the End is a kind of, and that, again, it was part of my brief to myself. Bearing in mind this is after The Finite's, so I've spent a couple of months in the edits for The Finite, pulling that thing together and going over it with a fine tooth comb, and it's like, I was ready to do something different.
I can imagine, and just because of the nature of The Finite, I imagine it was just like, no, I'm done with that now. For my own psychological health, I'm done with that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel a bit bad for Steve actually, because Steve Shaw and Black Shot, because he's done a great job on that one, but I didn't do as much publicity for it as I should have done. I did the launch, at Con the year it came out, and that was good, but I just, it really fucking hurt. It hurt to write and it hurt to live in that world.
Totally get it. Get it.
And I just kind of, I'm really proud of it actually.
Yeah.
all false modesty aside, I think I do think I got something good. I think I got something real.
Yeah, well, I mean, beyond the tone, one of the big differences between The Finite and A Song for the End is that A Song for the End is obviously sort of more broad strokes than The Finite. It's about the big ideas. It's about, like, there's politics, there's all sorts of things in there. Whereas The Finite rams it all down. It sort of like it focuses and refines down to that emotional center, and that makes it so it's such a weighty book, for such a short story, and where it's not a book where a great deal happens. It's about, like, the experience. It's experiential, isn't it? More than anything.
And I think it's interesting with The Finite. I think I'm always testing to destruct the notion that the political is personal, because I think The Finite is a political book.
Yeah, in many respects, of course it is, because, of course, in the same way that a lot of post-apocalyptic fiction at its best is, well,
and as you noted, as the key influences, right, as When the Wind Blows, which is, which absolutely The Finite wouldn't exist without that. There's no question.
Right.
That's that's the kind of, that's the parent work, if you like.
Yeah.
And and in some ways, I'm even trying to achieve the same thing. I think I wanted part of the reason The Finite was so hard to write was because I wanted to deliver that same sense of devastation that you get at the end of,
which is hard, isn't it? I mean, that's a difficult thing to do, because I often find with things like that, it's very difficult to manufacture. You have to see if it works. You just have to put it out there and see if it works, if people resonate or respond to it.
Well, and I think also, having said that, I also hadn't realised how dark The Finite was going to end up.
Oh, and it does. Again, I warnings, just all the trigger warnings, the trigger warnings. Just.
And that was what was really horrifying about that ending as I got to it, was the inevitability of it.
Yeah, because you feel it. I mean, it is one of those stories where there's no, there's a part of you that kind of maybe hopes that there'll be some miraculous, that there's some force will come and help them, the army or something, and it's just not gonna happen, is it?
No.
There's a part of you, and that is a really interesting experience for the reader, to take you into a place where there is no hope at all.
Yeah.
There's no possibility of a better tomorrow. Psychologically, that is a very interesting place to be. But again, people need to be aware, if you're having a depressive episode or anything like that, leave it till later.
Yeah, and I'm not convinced it's the novella that's going to light up your world in 2020, to be perfectly honest, because you've probably got enough of this shit going on. You probably don't need to be dealing, but except for the people for whom it is.
For whom it is,
and I'm never, obviously I'm not judging that at all, and whatever works. That's fantastic,
because I mean, the thing with this kind of fiction is for everyone that it will deepen their sense of anxiety or depression. It can also lend context. It can lend a sort of a means of processing.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think that. I mean, it's funny, isn't it? I remember doing I did Chimera, and we were talking about end of the world stories, and obviously The Finite came up as part of that, and that was a convention that had to move online because there wasn't because COVID was going on and everything was in lockdown at the time, and I was there with talking with the other writers about that side of things, and there's definitely I think because the question came up, like, does it feel redundant to be writing apocalyptic fiction and horror in general in 2020?
It's
a fair question.
It's a fair question. It is a fair question, and it's worth. I mean, ironically, it's something you can actually create horror stories about, isn't it? The question itself is kind of inspiration for what is horror. Why do we seek out the darkness in dark times? What does it allow us to do? It's the same for me. I mean, if you want a perfunctory answer, of course, it performs the same thing as having nightmares.
Yeah,
it allows you to deal.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
I think, look, and it's interesting how there were a wealth of different writers had very different responses. I mean, some people were saying, I'm going to move more into fantasy for a while, or I'm going to do different things. But then, I mean, for me, it was like, I I think there's always a place for dark fiction.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's always a place for it, because I think exactly. I think it's for some of us anyway. It's a reckoning, and it's a way of wrestling with the impossible.
Yeah.
In a relatively safe space.
That's it, isn't it? It provides a kind of virtual arena where there are no real measurable consequences, but where you can explore things that are maybe very dark within you, and whether that is despair or sadism even, or whatever, it's all there, isn't it? You can experience those things in the arena of the imagination, where there is no lasting consequence as such, beyond the entirely personal.
Yeah, and I think and it's obviously a novella about the anxiety of parenthood, and it's that's
I was going to ask you. I know that when Stephen King has been interviewed, and knowing that Stephen King is such a huge influence on you, he said that one of the reasons he writes horror is it acts like a sort of exorcism for him. If he can imagine the very worst, then it he has this almost like superstitious quality where it's almost like, well, it's happened there. It's happened in the page, and I've gotten rid of it, and it won't happen now. I know that in On Writing, he talks about one of his grand anxieties when he had children, which was, of course, waking up to find them not breathing or whatever. That was one of his grand and I imagine that is just one that every parent has. I imagine that is just part of being a parent. That fear.
Absolutely. And I think with King, although he's never talked about this directly. I mean, it's very clear for me that the reason that The Shining is such an important novel to King is for exactly that reason. Right. That's him. Bear in mind, at the time he wrote The Shining, he was a functioning alcoholic and descending into drug addiction as well, with a young family.
Yes, yeah.
You're not telling me he wasn't trying to work out what the worst thing that could happen would be, and then pin it on the page so it wouldn't happen. Like, that's exactly what The fucking Shining is, and that's why he's so defensive of the novel and dislikes the movie so much. The movie's just not as kind to Jack Torrance as...
Totally not. No, it's actually far less sympathetic, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that, and I understand that. I understand King's perspective on that, of course, even if he doesn't. I don't know if he's worked that out, but it's very, very, very clear when you look at it. Like, that's obviously what's going on. And absolutely, this one is like, The Finite for me was definitely about, and it's also... So, one of the things that I'm perpetually fascinated by, that my fiction comes back to time and time and time again, is what do people do when they've got no good choices? And that's a fascination that runs through all of it. God Bomb's got a ton of that going on in it. A lot of the stories, the meta narrative of A Warning is kind of tied up with that.
Yeah, very much so.
In some ways, and even kind of, there's even elements of A Song for the End there that contain that to a degree, I guess, in terms of Bill's situation. What the hell do I do now?
And I suppose in many respects, Luke as well. Once it's out, and once he's what does he do? That becomes his motivation for tagging along, doesn't it? For carrying on as part of the narrative.
Yeah, and I do like how both of our ostensible heroes in that part of the narrative are actually motivated by really kind of base. In both cases, it's really
it's very personal, isn't it? It is very personal. It's their thing, rather than where it was. Jeff is looking at things in broad terms, in terms of humanity and civilization. They're thinking in terms of their lives.
Yeah, it's their own pain, and it's exacting whatever revenge they can for the pain that they see that Jeff's inflicted on them.
Which is ironic, because it kind of hasn't. It's their pain. It's pain in many respects that they've kind of cultivated, isn't it?
Yeah, but they could defer it, and now they can't, and they're pissed. But look, here's the other thing, though, about it, and this is the flip side, and this is why Jeff isn't a hero in any kind of straightforward way. What the song also does is remove consent.
Yes, so it's something that he is inflicting on people.
Yeah, because you don't have a choice anymore. Now, funny enough, there's a King story again where there's an allegory that King uses. Now, this is in Nightmares and Dreamscapes, and it's a story about the end of the world. It's about a scientist, these two brothers, and one of the brothers finds this. He's worried that humanity is going to kill itself because of its short tempers, and he discovers this I mean, there's a community, and everyone in the community lives to 100, and there's no crime ever. And he eventually tracks down a chemical in the water source and figures that's what it is. And he finds a way of introducing it to the world's water supply, and then does the regression study and finds out, oh yeah, but they also all got Alzheimer's.
Right. Then, yes, I remember that one.
Right. So like he cures the world, and you know, so he cures the world of violence, but everyone dies. You know, everyone's IQ plummets until they can't eat anymore, and they die that way. So it's just he wipes the. I think it's actually called The End of the Whole Mess, which is a great title. And what's fun is it's one of those where it's been written in first person, and the guy's writing starts to deteriorate as the story goes on because he's injected himself with the chemical, and and it ends up with like this handwritten scrawl is the last sort of page, which is great fun. But there's a bit there where the scientist brother is talking to the narrator, and he says the trouble with humans is we're wasps, not bees. We can sting again and again and again and again. If we were bees, and it killed us every time we stung, then we'd have to change the way we behave.
Yes, yeah.
And I think again, that's well, A Song for the End. That's what it does, right? It kills you.
Yeah.
If you try and behave the way you behaved before, that's it. You're done. You know, you try and lie once about anything, you're done.
You are finished. Yeah.
So at that point, you don't have. I mean, free will?
Right, yeah.
Completely out the window.
It's gone, isn't it? Any delusion of free will is gone.
Yeah. And look, I think lying is important. I think lying is it's not just a necessary life skill because of the unfortunate capitalist society we live in, but like, you know, storytelling is lying.
Right.
It's really fucking important.
And, you know, I mean, beyond any like schoolyard morality, lying can be, you can lie for very good reasons and in a very moral way.
Yeah, you can. And of course in immoral way. I mean, it's not, it's the definition of a double-edged sword. I'm not naive.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
Like, that was the fun thing, was as I started playing out in my head, like, what happens if, it was like, man, this just fucks up everything. This really does.
Yeah, it does. Can you imagine, like, what would happen in family units if everyone had to be honest? Like, you know, parents to their children.
Yep.
That's potentially like entire generations just completely traumatized beyond repair.
Yeah.
Beyond repair. Sometimes I hate you.
Yeah,
sometimes I don't love you.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wish you weren't born.
Yeah.
You know?
God, I wish I'd had a daughter.
God, yeah, right. The potential for devastation is huge, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, and that's on a microcosm. Then you look at the societal structures. You look at the court system. You look at Parliament. You look at you look at
business,
the stock exchange,
board
meetings,
exactly. Team meetings in very small businesses. You look at everything. You look at everything. The way nurses and doctors talk to patients. You know, the little lies they have to tell to keep them calm.
Yeah, there you go. Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah.
It's it actually exposes, I suppose it's part of the elegance of the idea. It implies and exposes all the little the very small minutiae of deception that underpin everything, you know.
Well, and also, like, just look at you know, because one of the things I wanted to do, I was so excited to get to do it, and it took me a little while to figure out how. I really wanted to use the pulp horror construction of having it cut away to people who would die and cut back.
Yeah.
I think we've talked about it before. It's the Rats formulation.
Yeah.
And I love that, and I've always
like
wanted
that
to,
too. The
I've
sort of
always
window, yeah.
Yeah, but also as a writer, it's so fun because anytime you're getting bogged down with the main story, you just get to dash off a vignette.
Yeah.
You know, you get to do a little character sketch and then have them die in a kind of interesting way. And like, obviously, the fun part of it in A Song for the End is while these vignettes are happening, you're not, the reader, certainly on the first pass, they're not sure why the people are dying.
Right.
So that it does have this kind of like what's causing it. And there's no, I mean, I hope there's no apparent initial connection. It's not obvious straight away.
No.
Because the situations are so diverse, right?
Right. There's nothing you can link to. There's no like causal link.
Right, exactly. Until you've got, I mean, you know they've heard the song, but that's the only thing they've got in common, and hopefully that is an aha moment that when the protagonist works it out, the reader works it out at the same time and goes, that all kind of makes sense. But when you look at those individual deaths, I don't think any of those people are really doing anything wrong.
No.
You know, they're certainly not doing anything that deserves sort of.
They're just living,
punishment.
aren't they? You know,
Exactly.
they're just living. It's just part of life, isn't it? You know.
I mean, the one that gets me is the football supporter. You know, that kind of, which happens after we know what the song does, which is kind of mean, because I think that for the readers at that point, like, you kind of know where it's going.
you know something's gonna happen, isn't it? You know.
Yeah. So when you meet this kind of whatever he is, this kind of 9-year-old kid and his dad, you're like, oh.
Right. It's gonna get bad now, isn't it? It's gonna get bad now.
Yeah. I did that scene as a reading. I did when I did a launch for a song for the end. That was how I closed out the book launch. Was I read that just that chapter, just that.
Oh yeah, I was there.
Oh, you were there for that?
Yeah, I was there for that one.
That was great, because it's kind of like, because that's the other thing about it. Like, it is fun.
Yeah. I mean, that's again one of the big differences, because like the Finite is like a weighty book, isn't it? You know, it's a book that really. It really wants you to feel what its protagonists are feeling. So it's a book that you read to experience.
Yeah.
Whereas A Song for the End is fun.
Yeah, because that's the other thing about it, right? Is that it when you kick away that thing about being able to lie, it does expose the absurdity of our current situation. And some of that is scary, and some of that is just funny.
Some of it's kind of funny, yeah. At the same time, you know, that's the bizarreness of it, isn't it? It kind of exposes like the tissues of lies that make up every single interaction and relationship that we've got, and how they're ending, they're coming apart, is simultaneously atrocious and hilarious.
Well, I mean, I think the section that I had the most fun writing by far was that sequence in the school when it all starts to unravel. Right. So when he goes out and he sees the body of the kid, and then he talks to and it's what it is it's him turning the car engine on to get the heat, and then the song comes on.
Yeah.
And then everyone that approaches the car is slowly getting like that. I had so much fun with, and again, it really was just let it run, just see what happens, and the gags just started to fall naturally. Like when everyone answers the word yes at the same time, it's all like whatever 14 people saying it at the same time. It's like, okay, all right, this is like
interesting.
Yeah,
okay, this is fun. I mean, that is so often it though, isn't it? You know, don't you find like so much of the actual process is like getting out of your own way, isn't it? You know, just letting it go. It's like stop worrying and arsing about, and just let the situation play as it would.
I think that's really that's a good point, and getting out your reader's way as well, as much as it's humanly possible. You know, let them. You know, let them paint the picture, let them do the work. I always think as a writer, the most powerful tool in your arsenal is your reader's imagination.
Yeah, totally.
Like, by a long way. Figure out how to get them to tell the story.
Yeah, chime with them, get them sparking, get them working. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think like one of the things that's been really, because one of the problems with a narrative like this one, and I think because I think I talked about this before, like I was so nervous about A Song for the End. Yeah. In a way that I wasn't about the Finite. I kind of knew the Finite was okay. I mean, I didn't know if anyone was going to want to read it. That's their issue. But I knew it worked. You know, I was happy with it. Song for the End, and I think what it was that by the time I got to like the final round of edits, which is about the 6th draft by that point, none of the surprises were landing for me at all anymore, because I knew them inside out.
Right, so you had a kind of blindness, yeah?
Yeah, and I was starting to think, oh man, does this work at all? Just as a narrative, does it actually? You know, like you do start.
You do,
to wonder,
don't you?
Like,
you get to that point after you've like when you're so bloody familiar with the thing.
Exactly.
I find I get a kind of like I can't do it anymore. I have to like I can't do it anymore because I don't know.
Yeah,
I just don't know.
This is it.
You know?
And obviously I'm completely blind to the big ideas, and I'm completely blind to the surprises and the twists. And so it's been an incredible relief to have it out in the world and see these reviews going like, oh, it was so great when this happened, and I didn't see that coming. And it really makes you think about what would happen if. And I'm like, okay,
that's nice, isn't
it? Start breathing again.
You validate. It sort of validates you a little bit, doesn't it? It makes you feel, oh God, it's okay, it's good, it's working.
Definitely.
I always feel like that whenever I put anything out there. I never know if anything works, to be perfectly honest. I never know.
No, absolutely no, I don't either. But I think the core of that is what you were talking about before, is just the wildly different tones of the two pieces. That's the difference.
I suppose there was a danger as well, wasn't there? Like the people who read The Finite, if they understood that this was part of the same universe, that they wanted something similar, which happens, I mean, that's a very human thing, isn't it? To want the same all the time rather than have something different, but that doesn't seem to have happened with this one.
I think that's been okay. I mean, truthfully, I don't know how many people will have read both. I really don't. And I think that part of it is that I think the two books are going to find different audiences, which I'm absolutely fine with.
I think that's probably true, simply because they are so starkly different, despite, having tangentially similar characters, sometimes the same characters. Luke's only referred to in The Finite, obviously. I think he appears in photographs. But it's the same world, it's the same situation.
Yeah, and I think that there's connective tissue, but I think that I think they're just going to find their. I mean, what I'm going to be interested by is, because I know there are people for whom A Song for the End is their first encounter of my work. I mean, I've seen a few reviews who are like, okay, this is my first Kit Power, never heard of the author, never heard of the whatever. It will be interesting to see if any of them go back and pick up The Finite.
Yeah, really, of course. I mean, their reaction is going to be fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know how that'll play out.
They're going to be shocked. They're going to be surprised. That's for sure. They are going to be surprised at how different they are.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I think that one of the things that I've made a conscious decision with the writing is that I'm just not. I'm not going to be tied to trying to perfect a very specific approach to anything. I think I remember early on, like second or third convention, I was talking to Dion and Jasper Bark. We went for lunch together, and I remember saying to them, like, one of the things I was really worried about was about voice, because I always feel like one of my problems is that I never feel like my stuff does have a distinct voice. And the reason for that is because I feel like I'm always trying to have the voice match the story.
Right.
I think that's the most important thing. I don't think, whenever you're thinking about first person, third person, present tense, past tense, third close versus third omniscient.
Right.
I think at the core of all of that decision making should be which of those best expresses the story I'm trying to tell. Which of those modes delivers the best version of this particular story, and that should be the only consideration. So, like, I'm always trying to match voice to character and voice to story, and I worried, certainly early on, I was worried that it was kind of, the result of that would be that, people wouldn't connect with the work on a regular basis because it would feel different. But
right.
Yeah, but more and more I don't see that as an issue, because I just think that what I hope is that the common thread will just be quality, and that will attract people. And part of the fun of picking up a Kit Power book is going to be like, I don't know what's going to happen.
I don't. Is it going to be like this? Is it going to be like that? Yeah, right. Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think that's a really good way to go, and just let it be what it is or what it wants to be. I think there's something very pure about that. And let the chips fall where they may. If it finds its audience, it finds its audience. Even if it's like a small audience, that's fine.
Yeah. And I mean, I really hope this isn't the last sort of pulp horror story I write, because I'd not written exactly in the pulp horror mode before, I don't think, actually. And I really had so much fun. So I'm certainly going to do that again at some point, I think.
Yeah.
Because it's another kind of, another kind of tool of the toolbox, right? It's another kind of thing to play with. But yeah, I think it'll. Yeah, I just hope that that's how it kind of tracks out. But it does also mean, I think on the flip side of that is it just means that not everything I do will be for everyone, and that's kind of okay too.
Just the way it is, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
I've always been of the opinion that if it doesn't upset someone, then I'm doing it wrong. Right? There are obviously certain demographics where if they read my work and it's like, yes, that's right, I'm like, no, I'm getting this terribly wrong. Terribly wrong.
As long as you're upsetting the right people, that's the
it.
key,
That's absolutely it. And as long as it's also chiming with the right people, it's exciting, that thing. I mean, it's always wonderful when it works, isn't it? It's always wonderful when someone responds and says that it made them feel something.
Absolutely, and I think, like, the finite is going to deliver a very particular kind of emotional experience, and a song for the end is going to deliver a very different one. And
absolutely,
I like both.
Yeah, I like both too. They're very different flavors of a type of story, and there's space for so much there. The space for both. It will depend largely on kind of what mood you're in and what the circumstances are and whatnot. But yeah, definitely.
Well, I don't. There aren't that many, and there are some, but there aren't that many people who like only one kind of fiction or one kind of music or one kind of anything. Most of us are one genre. Most of us have a range of stuff that we're into. So
definitely. Yeah. No, it was a great fun read as well. I mean, it's actually really fun if you read like the finite first and then a song for the end after. A song for the end acts as that palate cleanser. It's got that zinginess that brings you out from the depth of the finite.
Yeah, that's that. Yeah, that's not. I mean, it's certainly writing wise, it was exactly that. There's no question.
Because I tend to write quite heavy shit. I was reading when I read the finite. I was like, I bet I know how he was feeling when he wrote this. I could sort of feel it coming through. I can feel the weight. I can feel that frisson that you often get when you're writing something of moment, like a personal moment, where you are actually drawing on your own anxieties and your own fears and sometimes your own experiences and your neuroses, to get that out. I know what that feels like. I know how that feels, and it sounds often like such a pretentious authory thing to say, but like sometimes you need to like put it down, don't you? It can get quite profound. It can get quite, I don't want to be feeling that again,
Well, I mean, the finite sat in a drawer for a long time.
I can imagine it did. I can imagine it did.
I mean, I've been saying to people it sat in a drawer for 18 months, but I actually think it was longer than that because I'm almost certain that the first draft of the finite was written pre-Trump.
Right.
I'm pretty sure it was written in 2015.
Actually. Oh, how interesting. Yeah. So, like, the context of that changes with if you came back to redraft it after Trump or within mid Trump, that's really fascinating.
Because one of the things, and the reason I know that is because I mean this came up in the interview I did with Northampton Radio a few nights ago because this is me, right? I think as I talk. I don't remember things. I just talk, and it's almost like someone's hit me with a song that when you start talking you need to tell it through. Well, anyway, where you can access memories, but I realized then that because in between writing the first draft of the finite and then coming back to it, I experienced my first panic attack.
What? Really? Wow.
Because my first anxiety attack, because I'd
never had one before, or
no, and I hadn't had one when I wrote the anxiety attack in the finite.
Right. Okay.
So one of the experiences of coming back to the manuscript was looking at that scene.
Yeah.
Having actually experienced it and being like, okay,
interesting.
Yeah. What did you capture and what was right and what wasn't about?
Very interesting.
Yeah, that was interesting, and it just kind of, and I mean, the other reason I remember that it was written pre-Trump was because I added in a line about Trump. I had to add one in because by the time I came back to it, of course the neighbour's going to say you don't think it couldn't have been that guy,
right? It feeds in, doesn't it? It actually feeds into the context of the novel. So yes, it needs to be there somewhere.
Yeah.
And it actually like it levens it. It actually lends it an extra layer, of course, because it gives it that context.
Yeah. And it just, but it was that was kind of, I mean, that was kind of chilling as well, you know, to come back to that and realize, like, yeah,
Edging
that
closer.
exactly.
That doomsday clock has edged closer in the time between the original writing and the second draft. I mean, I find that whole thing fascinating. Like, the one I always come back to, there's a story in Strange Playgrounds called Storm Song,
Right.
and the first half of that was written in the throes of a relationship where I was like head over heels. It was completely like so passionate. It was so amazing. And the second half was written after that had failed.
Right.
Very quickly. You know, it like burnt
Right.
itself out very quickly.
Yeah.
And it's so fascinating going back to read that now. Fascinating going back to read that and seeing like what was feeding into that.
Right. Yeah.
What was
No,
it
that.
was what you're unconsciously expressing a lot of the time. And
Oh
trying to
well.
work out in
Yeah.
yourself, you know, trying to get out there the anxieties that are
Yeah.
there. I find that
Definitely.
fascinating, you know.
Well, I mean, I think that's the, you know, the injunction that we both take from King is, you know, write about what scares you. You know,
Yeah.
that's, and I think we both in our own ways take that
Oh
injunction
God, yeah.
seriously
Oh,
and faithfully.
very much so. Very much so. It's that free sign. I mean, you were talking earlier about like the what dark fiction provides and what its purpose is, and you know, from the experience of it. There often does come a point where there is this really strong frisson, especially if you're writing something that's true, if you're writing something that you feel or that you've experienced, where it does feel it can actually it acts like catharsis, but also like trauma. You experience it over again, and it allows you to work through it, or you know, to understand why you're reacting to it in the way you are.
Yeah, and I think the finite was like that, and I think that it certainly did relieve certain anxieties or made certain things easier. I think too, the other gift of that book for me is capturing, because the kid in the finite is obviously modelled quite heavily on my own daughter.
Course.
I mean, because I mean she's right there. Why wouldn't you? And
right, it's just perfect fodder, isn't it? You know, it's just perfect.
Yeah, and like, but you know, one of the things that we don't talk about with parenthood at all, or no one's ever spoken to me about it anyway, is that kids really do transform as they get older. They don't just change, they metamorphose.
Right.
I mean, they become wildly different creatures.
So you lose the child of before.
You do. And you don't, it's not as simple as saying you mourn, because the now is always amazing. So it's not like you're not in this constant state of misery or anything like that, because the now is always like incredible. I mean, I remember it was lovely. I remember talking to a friend of ours, really, a friend of mine, Emma Weiss, who was talking about, because their little boy is just a year older than Scarlett, I think, and he said what I love about it, he says, every birthday I just think, oh, that's it, that's the right age, let's just sit here for a bit. But he feels that all the time, right? That just perpetuates. So really what he's saying is like the living now is just always kind of great, you know. And I think that's right. I think there is a wisdom to that, but it is certainly for me anyway. And again, I don't, maybe it's just me, maybe I'm weird, because again, I don't hear other parents talk about this, but there is a loss.
Of course.
You do lose, like, you know, 2-year-old kiddo was not 5-year-old kiddo, is not 10-year-old kiddo. They're very, very, very different.
And that has gone, hasn't it? You know, that is an artifact of the past now.
Never to return, never to be seen again on this earth, except in the case of kiddo, in the pages of the finite.
Right, yeah.
So, you know, that's a kind of... Now, one could fairly ask why I felt the need to write something so devastating at the same time that I was preserving this vision of this child at this age, and that's probably one for the shrink. But but it is certainly the reason that I still am proud of the book and still will. I know I will return to the book, even at some point. Is because of that, because it's that kid, and she's gone. She's gone forever, and I wouldn't trade her for the world,
right?
Because 10-year-old kiddo is amazing, but it is cool to have her still there.
Yes,
to have that version of her is still in the pages of that book.
Right. There's a permanence almost.
Yeah.
There's a kind of immortality, a record.
Yeah. Which of course. Maybe that's why it had to be that book, because that's the theme of the entire thing, right? The entire book is ostensibly about, because that's the other thing about the finite. The finite, I think, is about why do we write at all?
Right. Yeah. What
is it in us that leads us? Because our time is maybe not as short as Rob's is in the finite, but all of our time is short. All of our time span is finite. Why do we, those of us who write, elect to spend as much of that time as we do hunched over a keyboard? What is that impulse about?
Right. Yeah.
And I think it's about trying to scratch your name onto the wall of history. I think it's about saying, I was here.
Yes, for this brief time.
But it's about immortalizing that moment so it lives beyond you. It's about saying, I was here, and this is what I thought, and this is what I felt, and I was real. I was as real as you are now.
Yeah, there's almost like a protest quality to it, isn't there? It's like flailing against the abyss. You can't obliterate me. I was here.
Yeah. And we were here, and this is what it looked like, and this is what it felt like. And I think pulp writing does that probably better than any other kind. Certainly better than literary fiction a lot of the time.
Well, it's more universally readable, for one thing, isn't it? So it will not be as alienating. More people will know.
Yeah.
Will read of it and will be moved by it, whereas a lot of the time with with higher fiction, I suppose, with literary fiction, it can be alienating. It can be the case that people just don't respond to it because of that.
Yeah, and I think also it's about the people in the stories. I think that the classic formulation that I've seen is that literary fiction is about extraordinary people in ordinary situations, whereas pulp fiction is about ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances.
Right, interesting, very interesting.
And I think that the ordinary person is, and that's not a diss on literary fiction.
Not at all, no.
I enjoy literary fiction. I enjoy reading about extraordinary people from time to time. But the ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances are always more relatable. And I think give a truer picture of whatever the time was as well. That's the other thing, because exceptional people by their nature aren't living normal lives and therefore aren't seeing the world in a usual way. And that's not to say what they do see and observe and are part of doesn't have value. Of course it does, but it's a different kind of value to the value you get from a slice of a real person's like day-to-day life, or sense of that kind of thing.
That is definitely something that I try very hard with my work. There is something, I think it's as a result of having read Ayn Rand, where all of the characters are Ubermensch. They're all Supermen. It's ridiculous. It's absurd. I want the people who break the world to be normal.
Right. And I think as well, I think about, it's one of the things that I think informs Laura's work. A writer I know we both really admire. Now, Laura's interesting because she definitely always has one eye on the fantastic, the divine, the folkloric, the magical. That infuses the mythological. That infuses an awful lot of her work. But her other eye is always on. And I mean, she's talked about it in terms of class, right? She's really keen. Like, there aren't enough working class characters in stories. Totally. My characters are working class, and they are
totally true.
And again, that glimpse of the real, and it heightens the strength of the unreal as well, I think.
Of course it does, yeah, because it liberates it. It brings it. Yeah. It's not just for the privileged kids, anymore.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's for everyone.
And I think for me, that's the point of the kind of banality of the finite, really. Because not a lot happens in the story, but that's the point. Because
that's the point, yeah.
Not a lot can happen because because the worst has happened.
Right, and
really.
the worst has placed so many parameters on, even more so than them with their domestic life. You know, it's placed parameters of survival on them.
Yeah, that's right. But I think also, yeah, which is where I started, was just it's about Rob's desire for him and Charlie not to be forgotten.
Right, because I mean, there is that terrible acknowledgement, isn't there, at one point, where he knows that it's not. There's no point really.
Yeah.
You know, and that's probably the point that hit me the hardest.
But then you see that's when the writing itself becomes an act of faith.
Mm-hmm.
And is transcending reason, because he continues to record, he continues to, even when the battery goes, he finds a way.
Well, that's very human, isn't it? I think that actually where the essence of the humanity of the story lies, because human beings do that. We know they do that. That is actually what human beings do under duress. They very often don't give up. They don't roll over and die. They carry on. Even often in the worst circumstances. And there is something very relatable about that, I think.
Yeah, and I think about the kind of, the frantic scratch messages on walls that have been preserved in, in Pompeii when the volcano went up. You know, that impulse there, at the very last moment, at the very edge, to just try and leave some record behind, some kind of. Yeah, I think that is essentially human. I think there is something, and it's odd because it is nihilistic in a lot of ways. I mean, it kind of formally, I think, it's nihilistic.
Yeah.
Finite. But
totally.
But there is a kind of hope there somehow, even if it's just that act of faith.
It's the same thing you find in a lot of Harlan Ellison's fiction. He really reacted badly to people saying that his fiction was nihilistic. Even though superficially it does often come off that way. It's often very post-apocalyptic. It's often very cruel. There's often not a lot to be said for humanity or the individual human beings in it. But there is often this strivance against that, even in the face of absolute, total, apocalyptic abjection, where there is no hope of fighting it, there is no way out, there is still the individual character that does it, regardless.
Right. Yeah, and I've got a lot of time for that, for various kind of fairly banal psychological reasons, I suspect.
Well, there's also like a cultural mythological thing as well. I mean, there's a Christ metaphor, isn't there? That Christ experiencing the very worst within the context of his story, still going to the cross, still going to be sacrificed. There is definitely that element there.
But I think
metaphorically,
absolutely. But I also think in the case of the finite, there's a metatextual reason for hope, which is you are reading the story.
Right.
And therefore the story survived.
And
therefore humanity in some form survived.
Right. So it almost like incorporates the reader into the story in that regard.
I think so, yeah, because what I think it reminds me of is the fact that it buried in the text of 1984 is an appendix that makes it clear that the world that is depicted in 1984 has passed.
Yes.
And it's not something that necessarily gets picked up by everyone who reads 1984 because it's not an immediately obvious point. But again, it's almost metatextual because you have the article at the end that analyzes Newspeak and how it worked and how it was put together. And it's past tense. Right.
So it's almost like it's being studied, it's being dissected by another society, something that's come about in the aftermath.
So exactly. So whatever whatever happened, and obviously there's massive gap there, but something happened, and the world of 1984 is not the final future.
It's kind of that same trick that found footage or documentary films do, isn't it? Where they suggest the reality beyond them.
Yeah, and I don't know if the finite pulls that off or not, but I know that certainly was in my mind. It was like that's the kind of thing. And again, I think that maybe that does tie back into what I was saying about the fact that the novella also preserves that 5-year-old version of my kid.
Of course, yeah. So
that's where that hope thing comes back in again. Because like she is there. She's there anytime I want to pick up that book and be bummed out by the
end. It's an interesting way of advertising your own work, there, but
Well, I mean, what are you supposed to do, And I didn't. I mean, the thing about that one was, and this makes me sound like a complete idiot, but even though I knew where it was going, I didn't know where it was going.
Right.
I mean, that was interesting. Was like it did not. I really, really, really didn't realize it was going to end exactly the way it did. I didn't.
Did you know that it was going to have like the downbeat ending that it did, like the dark ending that it did?
I think now again, bear in mind that I wrote it a word at a time, the same way I write everything, so I really didn't have a plan.
Right.
I think I'd thought that that the entries would just peter out. I really did think I think my initial conception was they just get iller and iller and iller, and then you'd end up with whatever, and that I think that was kind of my initial conception, and then I can't remember what it was that I think the broken leg really did come about organically.
That moment's really odd. It's great. It's sharp though, because the tone of the book, the color in my head when I think of the book is it's like Nuclear Winter. It's got a grayness to it, and then you get this flash of red when that happens.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so the technique. So one of the things that's happened there is we've moved from it being Rob writing to it being a transcript of an audio recording of Rob and occasionally Rob and Charlie talking. And the reason for that is, I mean, that was that's one of those things where, like, I felt I was really pushing the fiction, having him have a second battery pack that was charged up for the laptop. I thought, that's kind of. It's cheating a bit, but I can just about justify it. But then I realized 8 hours of writing for someone whose writing speed probably isn't going to be secretarial clerical level quality is not going to get me enough of a word count to finish this book.
Right.
Not even close. I mean, I can't remember now, but I did the sums and it was like,
it's not going to work. So you needed something else. Yeah.
Well, again, at that point as a writer, you've got a choice. You could just ignore it. Just keep typing.
Yeah, I mean, and just rely on the reader just accepting the reality of it. Yeah, which often they will.
But I just thought it's more interesting to commit to the fiction of what would really happen.
And then changing the format is interesting, isn't it? Because that actually helps with establishing the new situation as well, which obviously comes about because of the wound, because of the broken leg. It's like a clear cut, isn't it?
Absolutely. But what's interesting as well about it is that now, so the decision to do it really was mechanical. It really was about the battery's going to go flat, and that really is going to happen, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't going to happen. So I need a way to end this fucking story. And again, I thought the MP3 recorder was plausible. I thought I had a plausible reason for him to have it. It made sense to me, and it would require less battery power, so it would get the rest of the narrative done, and that kind of solved that really. But the consequence was, as you say, it completely transforms the tone of that final third.
Yeah.
And by the way, not everybody likes it, and that's
really?
fine. A couple of reviews came out and said that they found it really jarring, and they didn't really enjoy it. And that's fine, because it is. It's very, very different, and tonally it's very different, and I accept that. But the thing that it did that I hadn't, an occurrence that was a consequence of that I hadn't predicted, but I think for me really strengthens the final third is it pushes Charlie all the way to the foreground. Charlie goes from being Charlie as seen by Rob to actual Charlie.
Right. She's got to be like an active agent at that point, hasn't she? There's no choice.
No. And you're no longer seeing her through Rob's eyes or hearing her through Rob's ears, I guess, technically. You're hearing, she's speaking now directly to you, to us. And that I think is the key change in tone, actually, because up to that point all we've had is Rob, and now suddenly Charlie is real.
Yeah, she's not just like she's not the character that he perceives, and that makes her much more stark. It makes her more identifiable.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is the way that final third plays out is I've had some readers say that reading that it became apparent to them that Charlie probably understood more of what was going on than
Yes.
gave him credit for,
Yeah,
you know?
definitely.
And I think that's really interesting. And I don't think there's a way I could have got that if it had been Rob the whole way. I don't think there's a way I could have captured
it's difficult,
that,
isn't it? It's a difficult one, that. But
Um,
it was. I mean, I just remember just the red in my mind. That's what I remember. It's just like, wow, you know.
Yeah.
I think it's because most of the book is kind of sedate in its own strange way. You know, it's just them trying to survive. It's just them doing domestic things but trying to survive. And then that happens, and that the context makes it so much more profound and like immediate than it otherwise would have been, because it's like you have an oh fuck moment, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, and that's, I mean, obviously there's the mechanics of it, because he drops the player and then it gets left behind and the voices fade away, and then, you know, you have her talking to herself as she comes back trying to find it. And that was really fun, because I had to visualize all of that and then work out what it sounded like, because that's all I had for info.
Right,
and then you've really just gotta hope it works.
Yes,
you know, you're just gotta like hope that the reader will follow the pattern of your brain at that point.
It's amazing how much of it relies on that in the end, in the final calculation. Like, it's just an act of faith, isn't it? You know, is it going to work? Is it not? I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know.
But I think that the central tension of that book is, and again, everything is heightened and in microcosm because they've only got a couple of weeks to live.
Of course.
But it is actually something that confronts every single parent. Albeit over a longer time scale, is the tension between, to what degree do you try and shield your child from, you know, the uncomfortable truths of the world,
right? Yeah.
And at what level and at what time and in what way do you introduce them to the reality of the cruelties of some of what goes on, and how do you navigate that territory, and how do you,
I mean, even just like the natural, it's not even cruelty, but just like the natural hazards of existence, you know, the inevitable pain of existence, you know, that they are going to experience in one way or another, or to some degree or another. It's really, you know, I imagine that's very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the way you cheat is you just get pets, you know.
Yeah, that's a good way of doing it.
Because then they get attached to the pets, and then eventually the pets die, and they have to deal with that. And that's kind of, you know, yeah. So I mean, that's a kind of short circuit for some of it. But you know, but I think as well, I mean, you know, and again, this is something I don't have an answer to, but it's the wider stuff too. It's the politics. It's the state of the world. I mean, I think about, you know, as I've been going through my own childhood again for My Life in Horror, and I think about those big moments as a kid where seeing something on the news really kind of screwed me up, you know,
right?
And thinking like, you know, at what age do you start having those conversations? How do you couch those conversations? You know,
it's
and what
difficult, isn't it? Because it's getting younger and younger. I mean, our generation is really interesting because when you think about the fact that we've been bombarded with messages of imminent apocalypse on various fronts from the earliest age.
Yeah.
You know, it's always just been there. It's just been there, whether it was like nuclear war, whether it was economic collapse, whether it was this, whether it was that.
And global warming's been chuntering away in the background the whole time, hasn't it?
Well, it was even in our damn cartoons, wasn't it? You know,
it was
everywhere.
in our cartoons, it was in our textbooks, it was, you know.
It's always been there. There's you know, be afraid, be very afraid of everything.
Absolutely.
That's I imagine that's only escalated.
Yeah, I guess. But I mean, it's interesting because, of course, I mean, it's funny enough, we were talking about this, me and the kid, the other day. We were out walking the dog, and she was talking about how she was really cold in the classroom, like she's having to wear her gloves and her hat because they have to keep the windows and doors open because they have to keep the air.
Right? Yes, of course.
And I said to her, like, you know, you're going to tell your grandkids about that one day. They're going to be like, Grandma, you know, Grandma Kiddo, tell me about what it was like when you were at school during COVID, you know.
Yeah, God, what a strange thing. Yeah, it is. It is like an historical moment,
Yeah,
isn't
it
it? You know,
absolutely is. Yeah,
we
it
are going to
absolutely
be
is.
like the people who came through, the people who like experienced this awful moment in
Yeah.
history.
Yeah, and I hope when the history books are written that they're fairly scathing about the way we were let down by our
Yeah.
leadership and governance. And I hope
Mm.
that one of the lessons we learn from it is to pick better leaders and
Oh,
demand
let's
demand
hope.
more of them.
My God,
You
let's
know,
hope, eh?
because it's quite that's the bit of it that I find quite extraordinary and
Hmm.
and quite troubling. And that's the thing that ties in. I guess that ties in with the song for the end. Really, it's like the virus has very clearly exposed the priorities of our government
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
terms of what they value and the value of economic activity over
Right.
human life, and they've told the truth about who they are. I think,
Absolutely, yeah.
and they're still polling at 40%. So,
Right.
uh,
Hmm.
what
Hmm.
what now, guys?
Yeah, I mean it's very clear that there needs to be something new. You know, there needs to be something else, a new zeitgeist.
This is kind of crazy.
You know,
This is kind of unprecedented and weird.
little Jeff was right flag. You know, Jeff did
Yeah.
nothing wrong.
Yeah, well, there you go. Exactly right. The Jeff movement. God, don't. Yeah, Jeff cultists. I'm going to be
Oh
apologising for
God,
that for the rest of my
yeah, Jesus, yeah.
life.
I mean that's the fear, isn't it? You know, you
Yeah,
you succeed, you actually like move people to something wonderful, and then it goes wrong, or they they get the wrong end of the stick. You know?
yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think it's yeah. We're in such a strange place. In terms of like society right now, in
Hmm.
terms of the state of the world. And I have to say, particularly in the UK right now, we're in a
Yeah,
very, very, very weird place because we've got, I mean, the US I keep saying this, it hasn't dodged a bullet,
no,
but
it
it's at
hasn't.
least bought itself some breathing
It
space.
has. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? It's brought
Yeah,
itself breathing space. It needs to work really hard now, but we
yeah, that's right.
haven't, have we? We haven't had that, you
But
know.
we're still 4 years away from a general, and Brexit's in 2 weeks,
Hmm.
and nobody seems to have the first clue what's about to happen,
Hmm. Yeah.
and it's just wild,
Hmm.
and we've got a prime minister who's talking about massively increasing defense spending and
Hmm.
this refusing to feed school children.
Right.
Like
Yeah, it's a very interesting space to be in. It really is.
yeah,
It's fascinating. Um, I don't know. That's the
yeah. Well, this
most
is it, isn't it?
honest, isn't it? I think that's the most honest answer we can give at the moment, isn't it? I don't know what the way forward is, or what's going to happen, or what it means. You know,
And
what it
one of
all
the
means.
yeah, and I think related to that, the other thing that I have been feeling acutely, especially over the last decade, but I guess in a way, kind of my whole life, an increasing feeling of brittleness about the
Hmm.
whole structure.
Yeah,
That's a thing that really keeps coming back. That's an anxiety that I keep getting again and again and
yeah.
again. It's just the whole
Fractures.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the whole thing just feels fragile in a
Mm.
way. And I don't know to what degree that's about a greater awareness of some of the historical precedents for where we
Hmm.
are now. And I'm sure that's part of it. And how much of it is actually just an accurate understanding that
Right.
we really are in that kind of a moment, and it really
Mm.
has things are more fragile than they have been. But
Yeah.
it's just a very, very, very weird time.
It's an odd feeling as well, isn't it? It's a strange feeling to have,
Yeah, and I
because
don't.
it would be easy to let it overwhelm.
Mm,
It would be very easy, and I understand when people do. I totally get it, you know.
yeah, and you also, I think, as well, it's the peaks and valleys in the sense of like, I mean, the vaccine obviously is amazing news.
Yeah.
Obviously, and it is going to make. I mean, by autumn, I think
Hmm.
even with this bunch of idiots in charge, by
Yeah.
autumn, we'll largely be back to something approximating normal.
I think so.
Um,
Yeah.
Asterisk, kinda.
Hmm.
Um, but of course, we'll also be 9 months into Brexit, which is going to
Right.
knock us right back on our asses again in ways
Hmm.
I don't think anyone's really fully predicted either. By the way,
No, there's going to be
the
lots of things that people have just haven't
yeah
conceived of
yeah
here.
the the unknown unknowns for Brexit are what are going to be really scary. You know, the stuff that nobody's even really thought about.
Right.
That's going to be, you know, the lorry park that Kent will turn into may not be the scariest thing.
Oh, you mean the lake? That was, yeah, which is like the best metaphor for Brexit I've ever seen.
Oh my god, yes.
Like the most pristine, perfect metaphor I have ever come across, you know?
You kind of have to laugh, don't
just
you?
perfect. I mean, just brilliant.
Jesus Christ.
I will say that it's given us lots of irony. It's given us, you know, a bit of a chuckle.
Still polling at 40%, you guys. I'm just saying. Just saying.
I mean, I try not to be finger wagging. I do.
Yep.
But at the same time, what is wrong with British people?
Well, you know, they've been lied to on an epic scale for a very long time by very rich, very powerful, manipulative people. I mean, that's not the entire answer, but it's a non-trivial part of the answer.
Yeah, it's true. It is absolutely true. You're right. I mean, you know, I am just being glib.
No, it's a fair question.
But at the same time,
we also have like no understanding of our history.
No, none whatsoever. None whatsoever. I still run into people who have bought hook, line, and sinker the absolute nonsense that the British Empire went around civilizing.
Oh yeah.
I run into that all the time, and I'm like, have you ever read a book? Like any book ever, any book ever about anything?
The more thoughtful will concede that it was a mixed bag. Yeah, we did some bad things, but you know,
right, the liberal approach.
Yeah, but you know, we did some good things too.
The Keir Starmer approach, yeah.
God, doesn't even know a white supremacist when he's arguing with him on the phone.
How hard is that to do, Keir?
Oh, dude, you just literally heard the Great Replacement theory and said, well, you're entitled to your view.
Right, yeah.
Dude.
Yeah. And it bothers me that I don't know whether he does know what that is and is just like playing his part.
I guarantee you he doesn't. I guarantee you.
That's even. God, that makes him pig ignorant, doesn't it?
It's outside of his realm of understanding.
Well, that makes him pig ignorant, and he should not be where he is.
Yeah, it's a problem.
Yeah, it really is.
He's a very, very bright and capable man in certain very narrow, specific ways. And unfortunately, outside of that, well, look, all I'm saying is I think it's demonstrated the limits of what half days unconscious bias training can deliver. Let's like that, shall we?
Brilliant. Wow. And I think on that note, Kit, we can draw it to a close.
Just otherwise, I'm getting out the whiskey and we're going for another hour, and then I'm probably getting booted out.
I tell you what, another podcast. I think.
Yeah, another time.
Yeah, I think that may be a good one, a good conversation to have at some point. But yeah, so guys, you will be able to find links to both the Finite and A Song for the End below. Is there anything else, Kit, that you'd like to pimp out while you're here?
I mean, those are the big ones. Obviously, buy the books, buy all the books.
Always and forever.
Yes, world without end. If you enjoy my work more generally, you want to find a way of supporting me on a sort of regular basis, $1 a month at my Patreon, patreon.com/kitpower. As little as $1 a month gets you something new from me every single week. Sometimes that will be audio content, sometimes that will be non-fiction such as a review or essay, and sometimes it might be a short story or an extract from my work in progress. There are other rewards available at higher tiers, but as I say, $1 a month gets you something new every week. It's normally early access rather than exclusive, so most of the stuff that goes up there is eventually will go on general release, but not all of it. And one of the exclusive bits of content that's up there at the moment is the Sherlock Holmes podcast that I talked about earlier that I'm doing with my friend Jack Graham. We're reading the entire Holmes canon in order. We're just about to drop the 7th episode, which is about the 5 orange pips.
That's a lot of books.
Yeah, it's a lot of
stories. That is
a lot of stories. and that's Patreon exclusive. So and if you were to sign up, today, you get access to all of the so far recorded episodes immediately as well. So yeah, if you enjoy my content and you want to get a sort of weekly dose of power, that's a good way of doing it. And as I say, it's $1 a month. So check that out.
Brilliant. Links are below once again, my loves. Anything else, Kit, or is that all for now?
No, I think that's it. I mean, My Life in Horror is still going on. The Brian Keane project's still going on. I've got various irons in the fire, but nothing new coming out straight away. So yeah.
Excellent. Oakley dokley. As for me, loves, you know where to find me. Knocking about here on the Exaggerated Elegy channel. You can find a lot of my articles and stuff over at gingernutsofhorror.com and published in Dark Moon Digest from the US, magazine from the US. Usually appear in that. Have done for quite a long while now. My God, quite a long while. You can find my links to all my written fiction over at strangeplaygrounds.com, and there is now a date for Born in Blood Volume 2. It's going to be in March 2021, so that's fabulous. Most pleased about that. Beyond that, if you want to come and chat, you can find me over on Twitter at Enigmatic Elegy.
Who's that coming out with?
That will be with Perpetual Motion Machine Publications over in the US. Who have been excellent to me just across the board, you know. I kind of started with them when they were originally Dark Moon Books, long time ago, because Max, who owns that particular press, he edited Strange Playgrounds.
Right.
So God, that was a long time ago.
He's a class actor.
Oh, Max is hilarious. Max is brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant. He's always so funny.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's so funny. And also, fantastic editor, by the way.
Right.
Like, if you want, he is so good at, like, making texts just more than they would have otherwise been. Than they otherwise be. Like, Strange Playgrounds was like, he made it so much better than it would have otherwise been.
Oh, that's what you want.
Yeah, so much more coherent. Brilliant guy. Absolutely brilliant guy.
Cool.
And I think that's it. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head. I mean, I was actually going to recommend this to you, Kit, because you were asking about video games for you and your daughter to play. Hollow Knight. God, just
yes.
I'm doing a Let's Play of Hollow Knight. God, it's so cute. It's so sweet. Okay. It's so lovely. It's beautiful. If you want to pick me up, guys, go play it. Go watch a Let's Play of it or something. It's so lovely.
Sounds good.
It's a lovely game. Apart from that, Kit, thank you so much. That was a great chat. That was a great chat. And guys, thank you so much for listening to us waffle on for the best part of like 3 and God knows how many hours. We'll be back soon. Absolutely. In fact, we've got a big one in the pipeline, actually.
We've got 2.
We've got a couple, we've got a couple, but we will be wending our way back Barkerwoods at some point very soon.
So excited.
Wow, I just don't know how we're going to do it. It's so...
we'll just talk until one of us dies.
So big. That might be how we have to do it, you know, because it's just so big. So much to talk about. It's mad. How did he ever write that fucking book? We'll save it for the thing. Just save it for
before we do it.
Save it for the damn podcast. Yeah. Right. Okay. Thank you so much, Kit, and thank you guys. Until next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Jesus, how Weave World I can talk about. Weave World I get. Weave World is kind of easy to talk about. The Magicka, how do you even start?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking as well this time through Magicka, I was reminded again how glad I am that I read them in the order that I did. I'm glad that I read Weave World first.
Do not start, any Barker fan, I would say, do not start with a Magicka.
No, build up to it, for
Build
God's
up,
sakes.
God almighty. I don't know how you...